Chapter 1249. Yichen naturally didn't go crazy. He was only a fine line away from the 8th layer. As long as he broke through, the heavenly tribulation would naturally vanish. Although devouring a large amount of tribulation lightning was dangerous, it could speed up his breakthrough. If this continued, God Emperor Hulk alone would have the opportunity to kill him. After all, the immortal energy in his body was already running out. Devouring so much tribulation lightning at once was no joke. Yichen felt as if his body was melting and evaporating. From the inside to the outside, from his internal organs to the most basic life, Yuan Qi, it was all filled with tribulation lightning. At this moment, Yichen's world turned blank, as if there was nothing in it. Break! It seemed like an eternity, but in fact, it was only an instant. Yichen's life form suddenly changed, and an extremely frightening pressure erupted, enveloping the heaven and earth. 8th layer life and death realm, complete. All the tribulation lightning within his body was completely refined by Yichen, making his 8th layer sword Yuan incomparably solid. His spirit body also broke through the peak of the 7th step and reached the early 8th step. If it were anyone else, it would have been impossible. The main reason was that the heavenly tribulation Yichen was facing was too powerful and contained too much of the universe's will. As the saying goes, fortune and misfortune depend on each other. The 7th layer is controlling the body, and the 8th layer is controlling the heaven and earth. The moment he reached the 8th layer, the universe changed in Yichen's eyes. Even the space profound became much clearer. No wonder 8th layer life and death heavenly monarchs didn't need space profound to teleport. This control over the heaven and earth allowed them to remove a part of the spatial obstruction. The tribulation clouds enveloping countless planets came and went quickly. As the clouds dispersed, Yichen's gaze fell on God Emperor Hulk and the other two. If I don't leave now, then when? God Emperor Hulk didn't care about demon ancestor Myriad Snake and old freak heavenly evil. His figure flickered and instantly appeared several billion li away. You think you can escape? As soon as God Emperor Hulk appeared, his forehead was pierced by a sword. He was fast, but Yichen was faster. Bang! God Emperor Hulk's body exploded into smithereens, and even his indestructible energy was wiped clean. The 8th heavenly sword energy combined with the 8th step destruction sword intent had completely erased God Emperor Hulk's existence from this world. Opening the netherworld's sacred eye, Yichen saw the fleeing demonic ancestor Myriad Snake, but he didn't chase after him. Yichen's left hand stretched out and retracted, and the space-time started to distort. A sword pierced through tens of thousands of layers of space. Just like Hulk Deity Emperor, Thousand Snake Demon Ancestor exploded into pieces, and his storage ring and precious Emperor-grade artifact instantly appeared in Yichen's hand. As for old monster Tian Xie, there was no need for Yichen to kill him. He suffered from the backlash of the curse-killing technique and died before the two of them. 3 quasi-sovereigns and 8 top-notch martial emperors had fallen in this battle. Although Yichen didn't know exactly how strong he was confident that he wouldn't be afraid of anyone below the Supreme Being level. Of course, he wouldn't be invincible, but even an invincible quasi-supreme being wouldn't be able to easily suppress him. These 80 years had been an earth-shaking period. Not only had Yichen's strength advanced by leaps and bounds, the people of God Paradise had also advanced by leaps and bounds. The majority of the people Yichen was familiar with had left God Paradise, because they had all reached the 7th layer of life and death realm. The old had left, and the new had come. Currently, there were only a few people Yichen knew in God Paradise. Among the people Yichen was familiar with, Ajio's achievements were indeed the highest. It was said that his martial path phantoms had increased from 5 to 10, which he called top 10 martial paths. Back when the two fought, he only had 4 phantoms. Closely behind him were Lifeless Blade artist Lung Fifan and Dugu Ju. Both of them were blade artists and could be said to be the brightest of the time. Both of them had set their sights on surpassing the other. For the moment, Lung Fifan still held the upper hand. After all, in terms of foundation, Lung Fifan was much more profound, while Duguju had started too late. His current accomplishments were already astonishing. Su Jing and Murong Qingsheng were also not bad, as well as Dantai Mingwei, Jiang Tian, Lu Wujian, and Snow Sword of Gojoseon. Moreover, 20 years ago, Stone Emperor had also successfully broken through to the 8th layer of life and death realm. It was said that he had spent a sky-high price in an auction to buy an Emperor Dao spirit root with only a remnant of its medicinal power remaining, allowing him to barely break through. However, his foundation was damaged after all. Becoming an 8th layer sky sovereign meant that his cultivation base was much weaker than an ordinary 8th layer sky sovereign. It would take a long time for him to recover. If not for Supreme Holy Land, Stone Emperor most likely wouldn't have chosen to break through hastily. The opening of Supreme Holy Land was fast approaching. All the rich and powerful families in the 3 great life star fields were sparing no effort to nurture their juniors. Supreme Holy Land only opened once every 10,000 years. If they missed this opportunity, they would have to wait for another 10,000 years. Now was the perfect time to use the 10,000 years of accumulation of the families. At this moment, it was all about foundation. The Dragon Clan had also recalled Su Jing, intending to nurture her with all their might. They wanted her to break through to the 8th layer of life and death realm before Supreme Holy Land opened. Although it would be detrimental to the future, it was not worth mentioning compared to Supreme Holy Land. If they missed Supreme Holy Land, no matter how deep their foundation was, they would still be lacking in luck. Not everyone could be like Yi Chun, whose foundation was deeper than anyone else's and who could break through in such a short time. The majority of 7th layer life and death geniuses with potential only had 2 choices. One was to stabilize their foundation and wait until they had 80 to 90% certainty before breaking through. The other was to hasten their growth and disregard the future. As long as they had 50% certainty, they would go all out. Of course, hasten their growth also depended on whether the seedling had a solid foundation or not. Without that, no matter how many treasures one had, it would be useless. Cultivation base still had to be done step by step. It was impossible to break through one layer after another without suffering. Even if it was possible, it would only create a mediocre powerhouse. Such mediocre powerhouses could be found in the 3 great life star fields, if not 10,000. The Dragon Clan was nurturing Su Jing, and Yi Chun was also preparing to nurture Murong Qingsheng at all costs. Yi Chun had spent more than 30 billion yuan stones to break through this time, leaving him with about 8 billion yuan stones. Adding the ones he had yet to obtain from the auction house, he had several tens of billions of yuan stones. Yi Chun decided to use them all to buy some treasures that could strengthen his foundation and increase his cultivation base. Murong Qingsheng had already broken through to the 7th layer for 30 years. She could be considered to have a bit of a foundation. Otherwise, even Yi Chun would have no way to help her. Days passed one after another. In the blink of an eye, there was only 1 year left before the opening of the Supreme Holy Land. Under Yi Chun's all-out nurturing, Murong Qingsheng had finally reached the peak of the 7th layer and could now attempt to break through. For this, Yi Chun had prepared 3 Emperor Dao divine pellets, which could increase her chances of breaking through by 10% in a short time. Murong Qingsheng had 3 chances. After 3 tries, it would be very difficult to break through. She could only take 3 Emperor Dao divine pellets in her lifetime. Chapter 1250. Rumble. The tribulation clouds covering countless planets converged once again. However, this time, their target was no longer Yi Chun, but Murong Qingsheng. In the last 3 months before the opening of the Supreme Holy Land, Murong Qingsheng had finally triggered the universal tribulation, advancing toward the 8th layer of life and death realm. However, she had failed twice before, and this was the 3rd time. Yi Chun discovered a use of the Hell Will, and that was to neutralize a part of the universe's will, reducing the might of the heavenly tribulation. After all, Murong Qingsheng did not walk the normal path, but the demonic path. The demonic path was fast, but the foundation was unstable, and it was easy for one to go berserk. If the power of the heavenly tribulation was too great, it would injure one's soul and marshal Yuan's spirit. This heavenly tribulation lasted for a long time before finally dissipating. At the same time, a powerful pressure spread out. It was the pressure of an emperor. Finally succeeded. Using Hell's will to contend against the universe's will was a strenuous and unrewarding task. Although the universe's calamity didn't have a pure consciousness and only had instincts, it would still carry out symbolic punishment to the one who interfered. A single mistake could easily lead to the end of both. Therefore, Yi Chun had only dared to do this after experimenting twice. In other words, in this world, perhaps only Yi Chun possessed the Hell will. It was inevitable, but also accidental. Both were indispensable. After breaking through to the 8th layer, Murong Qingqing's demonic power was very unstable, and the starry sky was flickering. This was the side effect of forcefully breaking through. Without any treasures to suppress and harmonize the demonic power, it would take hundreds or even thousands of years for the demonic power to become as smooth as an arm. The current Murong Qingqing's strength was equivalent to a low-level emperor, and this was still because she could fight above her realm before. Otherwise, she wouldn't even be comparable to a low-level emperor. Take the yin-yang life-death pill first. Yi Chun was already prepared, so he handed over a black and white pill. The yin-yang life and death pill came from one of the top 10 alchemists of the Phoenix clan, the Sunflower Water Pill Emperor. It was all thanks to the Fire Sparrow Emperor that he was able to obtain the yin-yang life and death pill. After all, the Sunflower Water Pill Emperor was even more famous than the Silver Soul Pill Emperor who refined the Purple Soul refining pill. He was ranked among the top 3 alchemists of the Phoenix clan. The yin-yang life and death pill was a high-level emperor grade pill and had many uses. One of them was to harmonize yin and yang, stabilizing the 5 elements in the body. If the demonic power or Zhen Yuan was unstable, it was because the yin and yang in the body were not in harmony, and the 5 elements were in chaos. Of course, the yin-yang life and death pill could only adjust the condition, and it could not help the body reach its peak state all of a sudden. In order to reach the peak state, the body had to rely on itself, and the pill was only an aid. And Murong Qingqing nodded and swallowed the yin-yang life-death pill. The center of the White Tiger Star sector was a land of nothingness. It was filled with a thick black color, and not a single star could be seen, as if it was a chaotic universe that had yet to be formed. 100 years have passed. The supreme holy land will open. At first, this voice could only travel several hundred light years. However, as space and time trembled, the voice traveled further and further. Soon, all 3 major star areas could hear it. The supreme holy land has opened. Unfortunately, we are only at the 7th layer of life and death realm. The 8th layer is too difficult. That's right. Unless we don't care about the price and spend a huge amount of treasures, we can't reach it in a short period of time. Those rich families' disciples are really lucky. Although the price of forcibly breaking through is huge, it's nothing compared to entering the supreme holy land. If they're lucky, they might even obtain a supreme's inheritance and eliminate the hidden danger in their foundation. Forget it. Even if we break through to the 8th layer, we won't be able to do anything after entering. The supreme holy land is cut off from the outside world. If we don't have enough strength, we might even be killed. Some of the older generation's 8th layer sky sovereigns are approaching the end of their lifespans, so they value the supreme's inheritance even more. Riches come from danger. You can't say it like that. All of a sudden, the 3 major star areas were talking about the supreme holy land. In the void, a golden battleship was flying at an extreme speed. Inside the battleship sat Yi Chun and Murong Qingqing. Su Jing's destination was the Azure Dragon Star area, so she wasn't with the 2. I heard that Dugu Ju has become the disciple of Yin and Yang Blade Emperor, and Dantai Mingyue has joined the High Heaven Pavilion. They should both be at the 8th layer of life and death realm. Morong Qingqing's demonic power had stabilized a lot. After becoming an emperor, her body now had a noble and graceful aura. Yi Chun faintly nodded. Yin and Yang Blade Emperor is one of the top Blade Emperors of the human race. He has the strength of a quasi-monarch. The High Heaven Pavilion is an emperor-level power. Raising the two to the 8th layer of life and death realm is not hard. Dugu Ju and Dantai Mingwei, who came from Elysium, didn't have any background. Wanting to break through to the 8th layer of life and death realm in a short period of time was too difficult. Although Yichen wanted to, he didn't have the resources to provide them. Raising Morong Qingqing was already his limit. Of course, the two might not necessarily accept it. Becoming the disciple of a powerful expert or joining a powerful force was undoubtedly a wise decision for them. Ju, you are Master's 8th disciple, and also the disciple that Master favors the most. I hope that during this trip to the Supreme Holy Land, you will be able to obtain the inheritance of a Blade Sovereign. Heaven Flower Planet, Yin and Yang Peak. Yin and Yang Blade Emperor stood with his hands clasped behind his back and said to Dugu Ju, Master, rest assured, Dugu Ju won't let you down. Dugu Ju cupped his hands and bowed. All right, you can go now. Yin and Yang Blade Emperor waved his hand. Farewell, Master. Turning around, Dugu Ju flew into the sky and left. Ju is more suitable for the Blade Dao than my 7 disciples. Whether he can succeed or not will depend on his luck. Encountering Dugu Ju was an extremely coincidental thing. Yin and Yang Blade Emperor took a liking to the latter and personally went to his residence, asking to take him in as a disciple and promising to raise him to the 8th layer of life and death realm. After interacting for a while, Yin and Yang Blade Emperor once again realized that the latter was a rare Blade Dao genius. Perhaps he might not be able to inherit his legacy, but he would certainly be able to walk further on the path of the Blade Dao. As for why he didn't go to the Supreme Holy Land, it was quite simple. He had already been there twice. The Supreme Holy Land not only required strength, but also opportunities. It was not a place where one could reap rewards just by going there, and it was also not a place where one could reap rewards just by having strength. Having been there twice, he knew that he had no fate with the Supreme Holy Land, and forcing it would only ruin his own Dao heart. At the same time, Dantai Mingwei also left the High Heaven Pavilion and headed toward the central void of the White Tiger Starfield. Having reached the 8th layer of life and death realm, her aura was extremely stable, and it did not seem like she had experienced a forceful breakthrough. The Yin-Yang Sky Patching spell is a secret martial art of my High Heaven Pavilion. Although it is not a martial art, it is more powerful than a martial art. Once trained to a certain level, it will be able to reverse the cycle of yin and yang, making up for all the deficiencies. This was what the pavilion master had told her. Supreme Holy Land, I, Chu Zhongtian, have arrived. Back then, Chu Zhongtian was over 50 years old and could not enter the God Paradise. However, this did not hinder his growth. After traveling for nearly 100 years, he relied on his perseverance and luck to successfully break through to the 7th layer of life and death realm. Then, he met a mysterious old man. He did not know what the old man's strength was, because he could not even touch the old man's bottom line. Under the guidance of the mysterious old man, he advanced by leaps and bounds, reaching the 8th layer of life and death realm. Yichun, Dugu Ju, you two should be going to the Supreme Holy Land, right? That's good too. Being alone is too lonely. Chapter 12:51. At the center of White Tiger Starfield, there was a starry gate comparable to a planet. On the left side of the gate was coiled an azure dragon, and on the right side was a white tiger roaring. Above it was a vermilion bird soaring, and below it was a black tortoise carrying the entire gate. It gave off a vast and majestic feeling of oppression and vicissitudes. At this moment, the starry gate had already opened. The inside was a sea of chaos, and no one knew where it led to. Seems like I, old ancestor Tsong Kong, am the first to arrive. An aged figure instantly appeared in front of the gate. With a chuckle, His figure flickered and entered the gate. Supreme Holy Land was only open to 8th layer life and Death Realm experts. Without sufficient cultivation base, one couldn't even see the gate. Although Supremes could see it, they couldn't enter. The first was the rule, and the second was that one shouldn't look down on this gate. It was one of the 4 spiritual gates that had been born since ancient times. It was mysterious and unfathomable, and anyone who dared to offend it would be crushed. As time passed, more and more emperors entered Supreme Holy Land. Some were nearing the end of their lifespans, some were like the sun in the sky, and some were young emperors. All of them had the same goal, to obtain the inheritance of a supremacy and shorten the time needed to break through. It should be known that any supremacy's inheritance contained the secret of breaking through to the 9th layer. Without this secret, it would take a lot of time to figure it out by relying on oneself or other Supremes. In the distance, a purple battleship appeared. The cabin door opened, and 3 youths walked out, 2 men and 1 woman. The leading youth was clad in purple. As he looked around, he gave off an indescribable domineering aura. Judging from his powerful aura, he was clearly a quasi-venerable. The man and woman following behind him were much weaker than him in terms of aura. They should be peak emperors or high-level emperors. Purple-robed emperor. Is Supreme Holy Land really as mystical as the legends say? The Empress was very curious about Supreme Holy Land and asked. The purple-robed youth smiled and said, "It only opens once every 10,000 years. Just this point alone is enough to show how extraordinary it is. After entering, you all have to be careful. There are countless corpses of paragons inside. Their corpse chi has formed new life forms that are proficient in some of the martial arts of paragons. The stronger ones even have the strength of a quasi-paragon. However, they usually appear in the core region." The purple-robed emperor was one of the 4 young quasi-venerables of the human race. The 4 young quasi-venerables were purple-white, golden-green, and the green-robed emperor was also one of them. On the quasi-venerables list, the purple-robed emperor was ranked 19th, while the green-robed emperor was ranked 21st. Although there weren't many quasi-venerables among the major races, there were more than 10 times more than supreme beings. Being ranked 19th was almost invincible among those below the supreme being level. In comparison, Old Ancestor Wooling, Enyang Old Man, and the others could only be considered as powerful quasi-venerables. The purple-robed emperor alone could easily suppress all of them and eliminate 1 or 2 of them. The purple-white, golden-green, and golden-white quasi-venerables were all far from 10,000 years old. In their respective generations, they were all number 1 in the paradise of gods. Over the countless years, no one knew how many number 1 rankers of the paradise of gods there had been. All they knew was that the weakest among them was a high-level emperor, and the strongest was an honorable. Let's go in. The purple-robed emperor's figure flickered, turning into a purple cloud that floated toward the gate of 4 souls and disappeared within. Supreme Holy Land. This enormous holy land was actually a plain. There were strong plains and weak plains. The weak plains, even without a gate, couldn't stop the invasion of life and death kings. The strong plains, on the other hand, were close to a world with a world barrier. Even supreme beings couldn't invade them. Although Supreme Holy Land wasn't a world, it wasn't too far off. Moreover, the aura of the supreme beings' corpses had corroded the entire plane over the years, giving it its own spirituality. If a supreme being wanted to invade it, it would be harder than invading a world. Supreme Holy Land was the foundation of the human race. Without it, the human race would undoubtedly be much weaker. This was also the reason why the powerful races would grow stronger and stronger, while the weak races would never be able to close the gap. This was the accumulation of countless years, and as time passed, the accumulation would only grow stronger and stronger. Of course, it had to be mentioned that the human race's supreme holy land wasn't the strongest. The land of demons and demons was even more famous. Evil spirit race had their land of evil spirits, barbarian tribe had their savage holy land, and giant tribe had their giant spirit graveyard. The boundless Supreme Being corpse chi formed a faint mist. In Supreme Holy Land, the martial aura was extremely dense. Even if a Supreme Being died, the aura and what they left behind contained the essence of martial skills. This essence could even change the rules of space and time. Creating martial skills here was 10 times, dozens of times, or even 100 times easier than outside. Many supreme martial skills were created in Supreme Holy Land, and the creator could perfect them in Supreme Holy Land. Each mountain represented a Supreme Being's corpse. Yi Chun and Murong Qinsheng were currently in the periphery, trespassing into Supreme Holy Land die. Within the mist, human figures rushed out one after another. These figures were either using fire-profound martial skills, water-profound martial skills, or earth-profound martial skills. Each of these martial skills was extremely powerful. Even Yi Chun didn't think that the first change martial skill he had created could surpass them. These figures weren't people, but new lives formed from the Supreme Being's corpse energy. They were commonly called corpses. Although corpses were living beings, they lacked intelligence. They only had the instinct to display martial skills. In Supreme Holy Land, they were immortal and indestructible. Once they were killed, they would be born again in the next moment. Endless martial skills, this is truly worthy of being called a Supreme Holy Land. Yi Chun praised. Every time he killed a corpse, Yi Chun would gain insight into a martial skill. Although this martial skill didn't have much power, it contained a trace of the Supreme Being's martial skill essence. The more he saw, the more inspirations he would have. Gradually, the two of them ventured deeper into Supreme Holy Land. As they went deeper, the strength of these corpses became increasingly strong. From a first revolution martial skill, it became a second revolution martial skill. This is almost my limit. Murong Qinsheng looked at the nearest mountain. Yi Chun nodded. Be careful. The corpses were just a small problem. The key was how to get close to the Supreme Being's corpse. The closer one got to the Supreme Being's corpse, the stronger the strength of the corpses and the more terrifying the might of their martial skills. Although there were a large number of corpses displaying second revolution martial skills, once they got close to the Supreme Being's corpse, it was normal to see corpses displaying fourth revolution martial skills. Fortunately, the power of the corpses wasn't endless. Yi Chun continued to venture deeper. As for the Supreme Being's inheritance, he didn't care much about it. It would be best if he had it, but it didn't matter if he didn't. What he cared about was the atmosphere of martial arts. Here, he felt that his inspiration was always flying. In the outside world, it would take a long time for him to have a trace of inspiration. Chapter 1252. Kid, the Earthstar Border Sovereign's inheritance belongs to me, Wanhua Emperor. Get out of my way. Wanhua Emperor was a peak emperor. As a peak emperor, if he wanted to go one step further and become a quasi-sovereign, he would need at least a few thousand years to reach this goal. However, if he could obtain the supreme inheritance, he could do it in a short period of time. Moreover, there was the possibility of breaking through to the supreme realm in the future. Is that so? Although I don't know if the inheritance is suitable for me, there's no reason for me to let you have it. Chu Zhongtian grinned as he struck towards the Wanhua Emperor. Courting death. Wanhua Emperor was furious. His body burst out with countless rays of light as he punched out. Rumble. The earth shook, and Wanhua Emperor vomited blood as he was sent flying. Quasi-sovereign. Wanhua Emperor was shocked. Not bad. Although he said so, Chu Zhongtian thought inwardly. Master said I have the strength of a quasi-sovereign. I didn't believe it at first, but now it seems to be true. You win. Wanhua Emperor turned and left. White-haired kid, the inheritance of Iron Bloodblade Sovereign is not something you can touch. Don't force me to take action. Leave quickly. The same situation happened to Duguju. However, Duguju's opponent was even more powerful than Wanhua Emperor. He was clearly a quasi-sovereign, titled star, splitting blade emperor. If you want to fight, then fight. What's with all the nonsense? Compared to the supreme inheritance, Duguju seemed more interested in his opponent. He pulled out his blade and attacked. Bastard, you asked for it. Seeing his opponent so arrogant, star-splitting blade emperor's eyes turned cold. He pulled out his shining blade and slashed out with star-splitting slash. Clang, clang, clang. After exchanging over 100 moves, neither of them could do anything to the other. The star-splitting blade emperor was only a normal one among the demigods, but Dugujue was not that bad either. He also had the strength of a normal demigod. The yin and yang blade emperor had spent half of his lifetime's wealth. It was not as simple as raising Dugujue to the 8th sky of life and death realm. Yin-Yang Blade Emperor's Yin-Yang Blade Arts? Star-Splitting Saber Emperor vaguely recognized Duguju's saber technique, but he was not sure. The reason why Xiao Chun could not be sure was that Duguju's Yin-Yang saber technique was different from the Yin-Yang saber sovereigns. Although it was much more immature, it had other things. Of course, the essence was the same. They both borrowed force to fight. The Yin-Yang Saber Emperor was famous among the quasi-venerables. The Yin-Yang Saber technique was a famous martial art. The star-splitting Saber Emperor knew his own limitations. He knew that even if his strength increased by 10 times, he would still not be a match for the Yin-Yang Saber Emperor. The other party possessed the Yin-Yang Saber technique. The chances of him defeating the other party were slim. Do you still want to fight? Duguju secretly exclaimed that the yin and yang sabersmanship was really powerful. He thought to himself, my cultivation has improved, but my sabersmanship has not. I only have 60% to 70% of the essence of the master's yin and yang sabersmanship. After adding some of my own things, it actually has such power. Not only can it resolve the opponent's attack, but it can also counterattack. Send my regards to the Yin-Yang Saber Emperor. The star-splitting Saber Monarch was straightforward and did not pester him for too long. In the younger generation, Agio was the most tyrannical. Once the 10 strongest martial arts were used, 10 Agios immediately appeared. Each Agio could use a 4th revolution martial art and beat his opponent, a quasi-venerable, into a sorry state. The 10 strongest martial arts complemented each other. It wasn't as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. The 10 martial arts would also fuse together to a certain extent. It was said that when the upper echelons of Agio's family knew that Agio had evolved the martial art phantom into the 10 strongest martial arts, they unanimously passed the decision to make Agio the family saint's son. In their opinion, if Agio became a sovereign one day, he would definitely become a legend among sovereigns. The 10 strongest martial arts seemed very difficult to cultivate. After all, one had to cultivate 10 different martial arts. However, once one reached the great accomplishment stage, each martial art would become a supreme martial art. Then, among the sovereigns, there would be almost no one who could be a match for them. This was a kind of martial arts where one would either succeed or die trying. The potential was huge, but the bottleneck was also huge. In this trip to Sovereign Holy Land, Agio was determined to win. He was different from Yichun. Yichun walked on the path of pure sword Dao, pursuing self-improvement. On the other hand, Agio's 10 strongest martial arts paid attention to the multitude of rivers running into the sea. If he could obtain the inheritance of a sovereign, then he would obtain countless martial arts experience, and reaching the great accomplishment stage of the 10 strongest martial arts would be a lot easier. After all, a sovereign would certainly create more than one supreme martial art in his lifetime. Some outstanding sovereigns could even create dozens of supreme martial arts. In addition to Agio, Duguju, Chu Zhongtian, and others, Lung Fifan, Su Jing, and Dantai Mingwe had all risen to prominence in Sovereign Holy Land. In the past, they were only geniuses. But now, they already had the strength to contend against the powerhouses of the older generation. Murong Qingsheng was originally not much inferior to them. However, with Yi Qin's resources, pushing her to the 8th layer of life and death realm was already his utmost effort. The rest had the heart, but lacked the strength. After all, Yi Qin was just one person. In terms of resources accumulation, he couldn't compare with the big powers or races. In addition to these people, there was also a young woman who was even more shocking. She was Xianhou, the Xianhou who had been missing for 100 years. Back in Elysium, The only people Yi-Chen admired were Dragon King and Xianhou. Towards Dragon King, Yi-Chen respected the most, and towards Xianhou, Yi-Chen truly admired her. If Xianhou didn't spend so much energy on other things, even if her martial strength wasn't as good as Yi-Chen's, it wouldn't be too far off. It could be said that in the entire Elysium, only Xianhou could compete with him. Apart from martial Dao, she was also proficient in formations, restrictions, seals, medicine, astrology, and even numerology. The first time she saw Yi-Chen, she could tell that Yi-Chen's past was shrouded in mist, and so was his future. It was just like the demons, Shaman Demon King's bloodline, could see each other's futures. Even if Xianhou wasn't as good as the Shaman Demon King's bloodline, she at least had her own essence. After disappearing for 100 years, Xianhou had already broken through to the 8th layer of life and death realm. Her cultivation base was incomparably stable, not much inferior to Yi-Chen's. Apart from this, her body was emitting a mysterious aura that seemed to slow down the space-time it came in contact with, becoming reasonable and traceable. This was the embodiment of the mystical path reaching a higher level. If the king of mysticism, who had passed down the mystical path, were to be resurrected and meet the mysterious queen, he would most likely immediately become her disciple. This was because the mysterious queen's mystical path was many times higher than his. It had already reached a level that involved fate. 8 gates of life and death. Xianhou waved her hand, and 8 light gates enveloped the quasi-venerables in front of her. What martial skill is this? The quasi-venerables had never encountered such an opponent. These 8 light gates cut off his connection with the outside world, and even his perception of space-time. He couldn't even tell where his opponent was. Buzz! A light gate behind him suddenly lit up, and a life character appeared on it. Many thanks. The quasi-venerables knew that the opponent didn't want to tangle with him, giving him a way out. His figure flickered, and he entered the life gate. Chapter 1253. Third Revolution Martial Art. 4th Rank Martial Art. As he went deeper, the corpses that Yi-Chen came into contact with became more and more powerful. Each corpse had a unique 4th Revolution martial art. Or in other words, they were formed from the corpse chi and martial art intent of the Ji-Zun, and each of them represented a 4th Revolution martial art. If it weren't for the fact that these corpses could only attack once, Yi-Chen might not have been able to continue. The world's martial arts are as vast as the sea, endless and endless. Although my martial arts philosophy is different from those supreme experts, the techniques I use to create martial arts are all here, and they're even better and more perfect than mine. A supreme expert is worthy of being a supreme expert. 4th rank martial arts can be easily created. Given enough time, it would be easy for them to create 1,000 or even 10,000 4th rank martial arts. Yi-Chen was inexplicably emotional. Although he had created the supreme sword technique Doomsday Calamity based on the power of the 5 elements of old ancestor Wu Ling, it was basically impossible for him to create a second supreme sword technique. After all, he had not even grasped a little bit of Doomsday Calamity. As for 4th rank martial arts, he could indeed create some, but it was very limited. He did not have that much martial arts experience in his mind. At most, he could create 10 4th rank martial arts before his martial arts thoughts would dry up. Supremes also had different levels of strength. From low to high, they were ordinary Supremes, mid-Supremes, powerful Supremes, and super Supremes. Generally speaking, Supremes who had just advanced to the 9th layer of life and death realm would only be ordinary Supremes. After all, those who could become Supremes were all geniuses with peerless innate talents. Of course, there were some exceptions. Some geniuses with powerful innate talents could even make geniuses of the past pale in comparison. These geniuses could defy common sense and become mid-Supremes or even powerful Supremes as soon as they advanced to the 9th layer. Supreme Holy Lands. The outer perimeter was filled with ordinary Supremes. Just a little deeper, it was filled with mid-level Supremes. Even deeper, it was filled with powerful Supremes. The region that Yi-Chen was in right now was already the graveyard of Super Supremes. The difference between super sovereigns and ordinary sovereigns wasn't limited to the amount of energy. More importantly, super sovereigns had a deeper understanding of the essence of power. It could be said that super sovereigns had already reached the ultimate realm of seeing mountains as mountains and water as water. They could display the same amount of power by 10 times. In fact, Supreme Supremes weren't the limit. Above Supreme Supremes were the even more powerful Legendary Supremes. Compared to Supreme Supremes, Legendary Supremes were the limits of human strength. Whether it was domains, supreme martial arts, willpower, or spiritual bodies, they were all at a level where they couldn't be improved anymore. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they were gods in the mortal world. Unfortunately, Legendary Supremes did not exist in every generation. Generally, only one or two would appear every few 100,000 years. Sometimes one might not even appear in millions or tens of millions of years. A powerful corpse charged towards Yi Chun, unleashing a killer move that contained the 8 Desolation, 6 Unity universe. 8 Desolation Supremes, 8 Desolation Hand. The person who spoke wasn't Yi Chun, but a young man in a golden robe. He held a golden rod in his hand and exuded a domineering aura. If other quasi-sovereigns were here, they would definitely recognize this person as one of the 4 young quasi-sovereigns, the golden-clad emperor. This was the first time Yi Chun had encountered a corpse that used a supreme martial art. He didn't dare to be careless and unleashed his doomsday calamity, slashing out with his sword. Pung! Blazing sparks exploded and a destructive aura spread out. If the 8 Desolation Hand contained a world, a universe, then Yi Chun's doomsday calamity was the ultimate power that could destroy a world. The 8 Desolation Hand was slashed apart, and the corpse was directly crushed into nothingness by the aftermath. What a powerful sore intent. Why have I never seen this person before? The golden-clad emperor had originally thought that Yi Chun wouldn't be able to deal with this corpse, but he hadn't expected that it wouldn't even be able to withstand a single attack from Yi Chun. Although a corpse could only unleash one attack, it would dissipate after that. Just as the golden-clad emperor was slightly distracted, another corpse suddenly appeared from the white mist. This corpse wasn't any weaker than the previous one, and its right hand formed a claw that tore through the air. Yi Chun could easily tell that this claw technique was extremely powerful, and that no matter how he tried to dodge, he wouldn't be able to avoid it. The sky, the ground, and the earth were all within his attack range. Rui Universe Claw. The golden-clad emperor was startled. The 8 Desolation Supreme was a supreme sovereign from 500,000 years ago, and there were records of his ultimate moves. Although the Rui Universe Claw wasn't as powerful as the 8 Desolation Hand, it was much sharper and more cunning. Those who were slightly weaker would be instantly pierced through. Sky Covering Staff. The supreme claw technique of a supreme sovereign, and Yi Chun's strength also roused the golden-clad emperor's heroic spirit and domineeringness. He swung out his own supreme staff technique, the Sky Covering Staff. In an instant, countless staff shadows filled the entire space, sealing off all angles of attack from the Rui Universe Claw. Crackle, crackle. A series of explosions rang out, and the Rui Universe Claw was instantly broken. Countless staff shadows surged forward, beating the corpse to death. So, it's just a superficial part of the Rui Universe Claw. The golden-clad emperor heaved a sigh of relief. He had seen the records of the Rui Universe Claw, and even he wouldn't be able to block it if it was only able to unleash 1/10,000th of its power. Unless his sky-covering staff could truly cover the sky and leave no gaps, the Rui Universe Claw would have a chance to unleash its power. Excellent staff technique. Yi Chun praised. Same to you. The golden-clad emperor laughed heartily. I am Wei Tian. May I know your name? Yi Chun. Yi Chun replied. Yi Chun, you're the number 1 disciple of God Paradise? You've really surprised me. I didn't expect that not only would you enter the 8th layer, but your strength would also increase by leaps and bounds. Wei Tian had heard of Yi Chun before. After all, he was once the number 1 disciple of God Paradise. He originally thought that even if Yi Chun's talent was extremely high, he would still need time to grow. Becoming a quasi-sovereign would already be amazing. You're flattering me. The golden-clad emperor's strength made Yi Chun not dare to look down on him. This sky-covering staff was different from his own doomsday calamity. It contained the yin and yang profound. In terms of foundation, Yi Chun was inferior to the golden-clad emperor. After all, the golden-clad emperor had been famous for a long time, and a greenhorn like Yi Chun couldn't compare to him. 8 Desolation Supreme has 6 supreme martial skills, and we've only seen 2 of them. Why don't we go together? The golden-clad emperor didn't care whether or not he could obtain 8 Desolation Supreme's inheritance. But if he could experience all 6 supreme martial skills of 8 Desolation Supreme, it would be extremely beneficial for him. His sky-covering staff was currently at a bottleneck. Once it broke through, its strength would increase by 10-fold or 100-fold. All right. Yi Chun also wanted to experience the other supreme martial skills of 8 Desolation Supreme. His knowledge was limited, so the golden-clad emperor might be able to explain it to him. Just like that, the two witnessed the other 4 supreme martial skills of 8 Desolation Supreme. They were 6 combined fist, desolate sky, tyrant kick, universe chi finger, and the most powerful 8 Desolation 6 combined palm. Worthy of being 8 Desolation Supreme, 8 Desolation 6 combined fist is even more tyrannical than I imagined. One palm strike is earth-shattering. The golden-clad emperor was still immersed in the atmosphere of the martial skills just now. Turning around, the golden-clad emperor looked at Yi Chun. At that moment, Yi Chun's face was filled with a sense of sacredness. His sword did not move, but the golden-robed emperor could clearly see an illusory image of Yi Chun waving his sword. His sword technique was filled with the power of the 5 elements, and it was no longer as rigid as before. It was as if the 5 elements of heaven and earth were all under the control of his sword. No wonder he grew so fast. Such comprehension is even more terrifying than the green-robed emperor. The green-robed emperor was the youngest of the purple-white, golden-azure quasi-sovereigns. Seriously speaking, most of the essence of doomsday calamity came from Wuling ancestor, and only a small part belonged to Yi Chun. This was different from the supreme martial arts created by the golden-robed emperor and the others. Its foundation was weaker. Now that Yi Chun had seen the 6 supreme martial arts of the 8 Desolate Supremacy, he was suddenly inspired. He began to fuse the essence of Wuling ancestors' martial arts with a martial arts experience he had absorbed from the Supreme Holy Land, turning it into the essence of his own sword technique. Once the sword was unleashed, the chi of the 5 elements flowed. They generated and countered each other, and the embryonic form of the world seemed to be evolving in this sword. Supreme martial art, 5 elements sword technique. After a long while, Yi Chun came back to his senses. Many thanks. Yi Chun knew that the golden-robed emperor was protecting him. Otherwise, the corpses would have rushed over and posed a threat to him. What is the name of this sword technique? The golden-robed emperor could feel the profundity of the 5 elements sword technique. The doomsday calamity from before was indeed powerful, but it seemed that it could not be used as freely as it pleased. 5 elements sword technique. Yi Chun's face was full of confidence. This was the first supreme sword technique he had created. Chapter 12:54. The Supreme of Octaterra's inheritance doesn't suit us. Let's go. Golden-robed emperor had no intention of accepting the inheritance, even though they didn't necessarily meet the requirements. Yes, the Supreme of Octaterra's inheritance indeed didn't suit them. Yi Chun was already very satisfied to be able to see part of the essence of the Supreme of Octaterra's martial arts. It was more useful than hundreds of years of hard work. The closer they got to the core area of the Supreme Holy Land, the more terrifying the aura became. Even though these supreme beings had died countless years ago, the aura and what they left behind were still unimaginable. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to form extraordinary beings like corpses. From ancient times until now, very few people knew how many Supremes have been buried in supreme sacred grounds. At the very least, Yi Chun and Golden-Robed Emperor didn't know. What they had seen was merely the tip of the iceberg. Even so, in half a month, the two had witnessed the supreme martial skills of dozens of supremes. Each of these supreme martial skills could shake the heaven and earth. If they were used by supremes themselves, they would be able to twist the heaven and earth and tear apart time and space. Supreme Sacred Elephant is indeed one of the strongest supreme beings in the history of the War Elephant clan. When he uses this move, it can really shake the world and collapse the galaxy. Golden-robed Emperor was still frightened. There was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. Just now, a powerful corpse had attacked him and Yichun. The two of them had joined forces, but they had almost been heavily injured. One could imagine how powerful this move was. The ultimacies of earth, water, fire, and wind combined with the ultimacy of power is indeed extraordinary. Yichun was also quite impressed. Demonic beasts didn't create very powerful martial arts in their early stages. But once they became supreme beings, their flaws would gradually be fixed. It wasn't difficult for them to create one or two supreme martial arts. At least, they wouldn't be too far off from human supreme beings. There weren't too many techniques involved in this move. It was pure power and violence. Of course, it wasn't brute force either. After all, it contained the perfect ultimacy of earth, water, fire, and wind. But compared to this move, I'm more afraid of Supreme Xian Yuan's killing move of Xian Yuan. Yichun said. Supremacy Xian Yuan's Xian Yuan killer style. Of course it's powerful. I was almost sucked into it. Upon hearing Yichun's words, the golden-robed emperor hurriedly nodded his head. A few days ago, the two of them had seen Xian Yuan Supremacy's Xian Yuan killing style. To them, this killing move was no ordinary martial art. It was simply a super black hole. What was more frightening was that once the black hole reached its limit, it would shatter into countless smaller black holes. If one's strength was slightly weaker, they would immediately be torn apart. Unknowingly, the two of them arrived in front of a huge mountain. The height of this mountain was unknown. It was like an ancient mountain, giving off an extremely strong pressure. To their surprise, there were already people in front of the giant peak. There were 3 men and 2 women. Purple-robed Emperor. The golden-robed Emperor recognized the purple-robed youth at a glance. Gold-robed Emperor? What a coincidence! The purple-robed Emperor turned his head and looked over. The purple-robed Emperor was very curious about how Yichun could walk with the golden-robed Emperor. The golden-robed Emperor introduced, "This is Yichun. I believe you've heard of him before. However, both of us have underestimated him. His strength is already no weaker than mine." Oh, since the golden-robed Emperor said so, it should be true. The purple-robed Emperor's calm expression revealed a trace of surprise. He knew the golden-robed Emperor's strength, but Yichun could actually stand shoulder to shoulder with him. How terrifying! Yichun, this is the purple-robed Emperor. His fan dance is extremely mysterious. The golden-robed Emperor introduced the purple-robed Emperor to Yichun. Yichun had heard of the purple-robed Emperor before. Of course, he had heard about them from the Fire Sparrow Emperor. After all, the Fire Sparrow Emperor was in love with the green-robed Emperor. After chatting with the purple-robed Emperor for a while, Yichun walked over to a woman in white. This woman was none other than Xianhou Yan Qingxian, whom he had not seen for 100 years. "Senior Yan, how have you been?" Yichun looked Yan Qingxian up and down. Compared to before, Yan Qingxian seemed even more elegant and refined. She was like a fairy from the 9 heavens, and her eyes seemed to be able to see through fate. They had an indescribable charm and charm. Yichun. Yan Qingxian smiled when she saw Yichun. Among the younger generation of Elysium, the only one she valued was Yichun. After a long time, she had gradually come to see him as a peer. She smiled and said, "Don't call me senior. I'm only a few decades older than you. You're making me sound old. Just call me by my name." She knew that Yichun respected her, but she was actually not Yichun's teacher. In fact, she and Yichun were both juniors of the Dragon King, so it was only right for her to call the Dragon King senior. Moreover, Elysium and the outside world were 2 different worlds. There was no need to talk about the past. All right then, Qingxian. Yichen also felt that it was inappropriate to call her senior. Life and Death Kings had a lifespan of 100,000 years. In Elysium, it was fine to call her senior. Here, age had no meaning. For example, the Gold Robe Emperor was 1,000 years older than Yichen. Compared to 100,000 years, the gap between him and Yin Qingxian was almost negligible. Besides the Purple Robe Emperor and Yin Qingxian, there were 2 men and 1 woman. They were an old man, a middle-aged man, and an old woman. The old man was called Old Ancestor Song Kong, one of the oldest demi-masters of the human race. The middle-aged man was the Godly Spear Emperor, and the old woman wore a phoenix hairpin and held a dragon-headed walking stick in her hand. She looked quite dignified, and people called her Granny Dragon and Phoenix. It was said that her body contained the blood of dragon and phoenix, and she was a half-beast. Youngsters, you are still young. Old Man Heaven's Will's inheritance should be left to me, Old Ancestor Song Kong. You will have plenty of chances. Old Ancestor Song Kong didn't dare to look down on them, especially the Purple Robe Emperor and the Gold Robe Emperor. These 2 undoubtedly had the strength to fight against any demi-masters. The Gold Robe Emperor smiled. Old Ancestor Song Kong, don't take advantage of your seniority. Moreover, the inheritance of a sovereign is for those who are fated to obtain it. Even if we give it to you, you might not be able to get it. That's true, but if you don't fight for it, wouldn't my chances be higher? Old Ancestor Song Kong still didn't give up. He didn't have the slightest bit of confidence that he could get the inheritance from so many people. Granny Dragon and Phoenix frowned. Old Ancestor Song Kong, you are underestimating Old Man Heaven's Will. He is one of the few people who can fight against legendary sovereigns. He isn't as simple as you think. It won't be too late to talk about the inheritance after we defeat this corpse. As Granny Dragon and Phoenix spoke, her eyes were fixed on a corpse that walked out of the giant peak. This corpse's eyes were grayish-white, and they seemed to have intelligence. It wasn't as simple as an ordinary corpse. 7 of you. Your strength is not bad. If you can take 1 move from me, you can enter the mountain. Sure said with a gentle voice. Old Man Heaven's Will, you are still alive? Granny Dragon and Phoenix turned pale with fright. Sure shook his head and smiled. People who die are dead. How can they come back to life? This is just a trace of intelligence born from the original body. It only is a part of the memories. Chapter 1255. This corpse was not Old Man Tiani. It only had a small portion of Old Man Tian Yi's memories, but this was already very terrifying. Other corpses could only instinctively use Old Man Tian Yi's martial arts, but this corpse was equivalent to an incarnation of Old Man Tian Yi to a certain extent. It could use martial arts more freely and exquisitely. 1 move? You're underestimating us too much. Old Ancestor Song Kong laughed. He did not believe that Yi Chun could defeat them in 1 move. Yi Chun, don't be careless. Old Man Tiani's ultimate art is the Heavens Will Capturing Hand. It contains a mysterious Tao, and to a certain extent, it represents the will of the universe. Be careful. Yin Qingxian transmitted her voice to Yi Chun. Yi Chun nodded. The Heavens Will Capturing Hand, as the name suggested, was a capture from the heavens. The heavens were the universe, and humans could not defy it. However, Old Man Tiani's martial arts seemed to be the same as Yin Qingxuan's. They both walked the mysterious Tao. Perhaps Yin Qingxian would be the most suitable to receive Old Man Tiani's inheritance. After making up his mind, Yi Chen decided to help Yin Qingxian obtain Old Man Tiani's inheritance. Sure walked over step by step. Every step was incomparably natural, as if he had always been there and had never moved. Seeing this, the 7 became even more cautious. Old Man Tiani was different from the other Supremes. His every move was in accordance with the will of the heavens. Going against him was equivalent to going against the heavens. One could imagine the difficulty. This move of mine has a total of 4,999,900 variations. Whoever can endure it will be qualified to ascend a mountain. Take this. Shur stretched out his right hand and grabbed toward the seven. Without a sound, the entire sky turned dark as countless hand shadows descended towards the seven. Good timing. Purple Robe Emperor shouted. A purple fan appeared in his hand. With a wave of the fan, time and space twisted. The fan shadows danced and wrapped around the descending hand shadows. The fan danced, forming a world of its own. Any attack would be absorbed by this world. This was also the supreme martial art that Purple Robe Emperor was famous for. Divine Spear Emperor walked the tyrannical path, not retreating nor dodging. The black iron long spear in his hand spun like a wheel of wind and fire, blocking one hand shadow after another. Granny Long Fong threw out the dragon head walking stick in her hand. With a dragon roar, the dragon head walking stick transformed into a golden dragon that protected Granny Long Fong. She didn't stay idle either. She pulled out the phoenix hairpin from her bun, and from time to time, she would release a flaming phoenix claw to meet the hand shadow. Song Kong Ancestor lived up to his reputation as one of the veteran quasi-venerables. His Song Kong Guardian Light was as vast as the sky. Any hand shadows that came into contact with it would immediately disappear without a trace. It was obvious that this was also a martial art that contained the world. However, compared to the purple-robed Emperor's universal fan dance, this move was not as agile, but it was more than enough for defense. Compared to the previous four, Yin Qingxian wasn't that famous. However, sometimes fame and power weren't related. Yin Qingxian waved her hand and a huge mirror appeared. The hand images in the sky were reflected by the mirror and immediately replicated into countless new hand images. These hand images flew out from the mirror and met the hand images in the sky. What a wondrous martial art! Golden-robed Emperor sized up Yin Qingxian and praised her in his heart. At the same time, he also used his sky-covering rod to block the attack of the hand images. The five elements sword art was so profound that even Yi Chen couldn't comprehend it. At most, he could only comprehend 1,000th or even 10,000th of it. The greatest characteristic of the five-element sword art was that, just like the five-element sword art, the sword chi was endless. Unless the internal balance of the five-element sword art was broken, there was no way to counter this move. Yi Chen, who used the five-element sword art, was the most relaxed among the seven. It wasn't because he was the strongest, but because the five-element sword art was too exquisite. This kid is amazing. He can actually create such a meticulous sword art based on the five elements profound. Song Kong Ancestor frowned. The youngsters nowadays were more and more outstanding than the previous one. The older generation like them were a little on the decline. The five-element sword art has improved a lot. As a witness of the five-element sword art, Golden-robed Emperor didn't know what to say about Yi Chen. In such a short period of time, his sword art had improved steadily, and he had never stopped improving. At their level, profoundness was no longer important. They could basically learn the profoundness they were good at to perfection. But at this time, creativity was the most important. The more creativity one had, the more powerful the martial art would be. The same profoundness could be created differently by different people. Some were very ordinary, while others were unbelievably powerful. Even though Golden-robed Emperor wasn't afraid of the five-element sword art right now, he was sure that Yi Chen would be able to push the five-element sword art to a higher level if he was given more time. The hand images were endless, and the scariest thing was that as time passed, the hand images changed more and more. From the beginning, there were tens of thousands of changes, but now there were hundreds of thousands of changes. One should know that the more changes there were, the harder it was to decipher it. Hundreds of thousands of changes meant hundreds of thousands of possibilities. If one didn't consider one possibility, it would be fatal. Heaven's will is unfathomable, and so is this move. It was the first time Yi Chen had seen such a complicated movement. It was even more complicated than the stars in the sky. The good thing was that the five-element sword art did not stop circulating, and there were very few flaws. Otherwise, it would have been broken through for sure. Suddenly, a muffled groan was heard. It was the Divine Spear Emperor. He had missed several changes and was caught by a huge hand image. He had no idea where he was thrown to. 7 people. Only 6 were left. I don't believe that I, Ancestor Tsong Kong, can't hold on until the end. Ancestor Tsong Kong was gradually reaching his limit. A few drops of sweat appeared on his forehead, and his eyes flashed with unwillingness to admit defeat. Ancestor Tsong Kong let out a roar and stretched his hands to the sides. Like a rock spreading its wings, a huge circle of light appeared. Looking closely, the circle of light was formed by countless black and white runes. This was his supreme defensive martial art, Vault of Heaven Protection. Dragon and Phoenix bring prosperity. Granny Dragon and Phoenix were not much better than Ancestor Tsong Kong. A dragon and a phoenix surrounded her, and the two complemented each other seamlessly, bouncing away all the attacking hand images. Unfortunately, the Heavens' capturing hand was much stronger than they had imagined. Soon, when the Heavens' capturing hand had developed to more than 2 million changes, the Vault of Heaven Protection was broken, and the balance of the dragon and phoenix was broken. Ancestor Tsong Kong and Granny Dragon and Phoenix were like monkeys in the hands of the Buddha. They were easily caught and thrown far away. In the end, only Purple Robe Emperor, Gold Robe Emperor, Yi Chun, and Yin Qingxian were left. 3 million changes. 4 million changes. 4.5 million changes. Fan dance. Heaven and Earth great shift. Purple Robe Emperor was unbelievably strong. He waved his fan and created countless space-time flows, moving the hand images away one by one. This is exciting. Watch my heaven-encompassing staff. Gold Robe Emperor didn't lose out. After a loud laugh, he waved the golden staff in his hand from bottom to top. In an instant, countless staff images merged into one, forming a huge staff that connected heaven and earth. The huge staff swept in the air, and heaven and earth seemed to be cleansed. It was as if this staff had wiped the heaven and earth clean. Compared to the two before them, Yi Chun and Yin Qingxian were slightly inferior. Yin Qingxian used the 8 gates of life and death to continuously dodge, while Yi Chun's 5 elements sword art gradually couldn't hold on. Compared to Purple Robe Emperor and Gold Robe Emperor, he was still a bit weaker. His 5 element sword art was also a bit weaker, and it wasn't as profound as Fan Dance and Heaven Encompassing Staff. However, the Heavens' capturing hand with endless changes gave Yi Chun a lot of inspiration. The 5 element sword art seemed to be on the verge of collapse, but it always dissolved the attacks at the crucial moment. 4,800,000 changes. 4,900,000 changes. 4,990,000 changes. Not bad. You can actually hold on until now. Sure had his own sentience. In truth, the true Heavens' capturing hand had already lost its transformations. The greatest transformation was the absence of transformations. However, it was impossible for him to reach the level of Old Man Heaven's will. 4,999,900 transformations was his limit. Towards the end, every additional transformation was a whole new realm. It seems like Old Man Heaven's inheritance is not fated with me. Yin Xingxuan's 8 gates of life and death were destroyed one after another. The speed at which they were being created couldn't keep up with the speed at which they were being destroyed. 5 elements sword art, rise and fall in time. A waterfall-like sword light sprinkled out, covering Yin Qingxian in an instant. The hand images that came into contact with the sword light were greatly weakened, and their changes were also reduced. Yin Qingxian easily dodged them. Yi Chun. Yin Qingxian looked at Yi Chun. Chapter 1256. The 5 elements were the most basic elements of all things in the universe. The rise and fall of the 5 elements would cause all things in the universe to change. Not only could it affect one's fate, but it also caused all things in the universe to cycle endlessly. The original 5 element sword art only used the 5 elemental mysteries. The 5 elements were very balanced, but it also meant that it was inflexible. As the saying goes, the Tao follows nature. The 5 elements had their ups and downs. As the ups and downs changed, the 5 element sword art came to life. For example, the metal profound declined, while the other four profundities flourished. Wood profound declined, while the other four profundities flourished. 2 declined, and 3 flourished. 3 flourished, and 2 waned. Not only that, the ups and downs also had their own ups and downs. Different degrees of ups and downs would cause different changes. In short, the combination of the 5 elements had endless changes and different effects. The appearance of the 5 elements sword art's ups and downs allowed Yi Chun to step into a new realm. He seemed to be able to hear the breathing of all things in the universe and see the invisible lines of law. His 5 elements sword art could faintly resonate with all things in the universe and guide the lines of law. Sure as heavens will capturing hand hadn't reached the level of Old Man Heaven's will, so it was broken by the 5 elements sword art. At this time, the 5 elements sword art might not be as powerful as the golden-robed Emperor's sky-covering rod, nor as skilled as the purple-robed Emperor's universal fan dance, but in terms of subtlety, it was superior. 4,999,000 variations. 4,999,900 variations. However, sure as heavens will capturing hand hadn't reached its limit. Although it had only increased by 9,900 transformations, its realm had increased by several levels. Its exquisite technique was still above the 5 elements sword art. At this moment, not to mention Yi Chun, even Purple Robe Emperor and Gold Robe Emperor could not hold on any longer. After breaking through countless hand shadows, one of them still managed to sneak in and teleport them to another place in the blink of an eye. 5 elements become one. Sword Chi armor. At this time, the sword energy in Yi Chun's body was pushed to the limit. The 5 elements sword art materialized into a sword armor that landed on Yin Qingxuan's body. Once the hand shadows touched the sword armor, their power and transformations weakened. Although it wasn't as obvious as before, it still had an effect that couldn't be ignored. And after Yi Chun did all this, he was immediately grabbed by a hand shadow. Old Man Tiany's inheritance is not suitable for me. Qing Xian, grasp it well. Yi Chun's voice could be heard, but he had already disappeared. Thank you, Yi Chun. Yin Qing Xian was very clear that if it wasn't for her help, Yi Chun would have had a high chance of passing the test. Against the heavens will capturing hand, no matter how powerful one's martial arts was, it would be useless. Only the level of subtlety would be enough. The 5 element sword art was undoubtedly profound and unfathomable. Since Yi Chun could turn his sword art into a sword armor to protect her, it was clear that he had already grasped a part of the essence of the 5 element sword art. Please ascend the mountain. Sure stopped attacking and opened up a path up the mountain. The Milky Way revolves. In front of another mountain in the supreme sacred ground, Chu Zhongtian was fighting with a corpse. This corpse's strength was far inferior to Old Man Tiany's corpse, but Chu Zhongtian was just one person. The Milky Way revolves was a supreme martial art. This supreme martial art wasn't comprehended by Chu Zhongtian himself. It was a martial art imprinted in his mind by the mysterious old man. If a sovereign were to know of this, they would definitely be able to guess that this mysterious old man was a sovereign, because only a sovereign could imprint his own supreme martial art into the mind of another. It was similar to inheritance, but different from inheritance. The longer the inheritance, the clearer the memory of the martial art would be. A supreme martial art forcefully imprinted in the mind would gradually fade with the passage of time, until that part of the memory was lost. Waving the mace, sparkling diamond stars appeared around Chu Zhongtian. These diamond stars seemed to revolve irregularly, but as they revolved, a majestic force was added to Chu Zhongtian's body. Some majestic force surged out from Chu Zhongtian's acupoints, forming a Milky Way that resonated with Chu Zhongtian's breathing. If Chu Zhongtian's thoughts changed, the Milky Way would also change. The opposite corpse couldn't be underestimated. The martial art it used was a supreme martial art that contained the profound mysteries of light and darkness. Heaven's secret transformation. The heaven's secret transformation was mysterious and unfathomable. Flashes of light flickered, its trajectory impossible to predict. If it were another quasi-sovereign, they would have long since been melted by these flashes of light. Heaven's secret transformation, the supreme martial art of sovereign primordial universe. Fortunately, Master's Milky Way revolves around this kind of unpredictable supreme martial art. Chu Zhongtian began to suspect that his master, the mysterious old man, was a sovereign. Supreme martial arts were wondrous and extraordinary. There was no absolute restraint between them. It all depended on one's comprehension and usage. If the mysterious old man wasn't a sovereign, then the Milky Way revolves around him would be limited and wouldn't be able to easily deal with the heaven's secret transformation. Thus, Chu Zhongtian began to understand that the mysterious old man was at least a sovereign. A sovereign's supreme martial art and a quasi-sovereign's supreme martial art naturally couldn't be compared. The former had already been perfected, while the latter only had a trace of its essence. If one looked closely, they would realize that the Paragon's sacred ground was like a huge chessboard. The center was filled with mist, and that was where the Paragon Legend's tomb was. As for the people who came to the Paragon's sacred ground, they were like chess pieces that were either actively or passively teleported to different areas. The place where Yi Chen appeared was extremely close to the legendary sovereign's tomb. His vision was shrouded by a layer of mist, which covered time and space. Even the Netherworld's sacred eyes couldn't see anything clearly, because the rules here had been completely changed. Heaven and earth were reversed. Yin and Yang repelled each other, and the 5 elements were reversed. Not to mention Yi Chen, even ordinary sovereigns wouldn't be able to see anything if they came here. Since he was already here, he might as well take things as they came. Within the mist, time and space didn't have any meaning. A single step could allow one to travel dozens or even hundreds of light years. Kill. Vaguely, a murderous aura could be felt. Crack. The time and space around Yi Chen instantly cracked like crystals. This murderous aura could even destroy the structure of time and space. What a powerful murderous aura. A crack also appeared on Yi Chen's protective sword energy. In the 3 realms, there's nothing that can't be killed. Kill. Whoosh. The time and space around Yi Chen completely shattered. Time no longer existed, and space no longer existed. Yi Chen could even feel his life energy weakening. 3 realms. Could it be the 3 realms of heaven, earth, and human? Heaven and earth represented the universe, the firmament, and the universe. Human represented life and all sorts of possibilities. In an instant, Yi Chen knew the identity of the owner of the murderous aura, the sovereign of the 3 realms, one of the 7 sovereigns in the history of the human race. These 7 sovereigns were the sovereigns closest to the true God realm. The strength of the sovereign of the 3 realms was unimaginable. His 3 realms killing fist was said to be able to annihilate and destroy everything. However, this 3 realms killing fist had already transformed from a tangible form into a murderous aura. This murderous aura changed according to the will of the sovereign of the 3 realms. When it was weak, it could only shake one's mind. When it was strong, it could destroy the heavens and earth, creating chaos. Chapter 12:57. The killing intent became more and more ferocious. Yi Chen saw stars falling and time flowing in reverse. This killing intent was no longer an ordinary killing intent. It contained the supreme profundities of the universe. Withstanding the killing intent, Yi Chen continued forward. The Paragon's tomb was something that could only be discovered by luck. Even if he couldn't obtain the inheritance of the Paragon of the 3 realms, being able to witness the true 3 realms killing fist was already good enough. This was more useful than cultivating for thousands of years. After all, the martial arts of the Paragon of the 3 realms were created with painstaking effort. Pop, pop. Space-time collapsed as masses of chaotic chi currents were born. The universe was originally evolved from chaos. The 3 realms killing fist could already destroy the universe in a small area, approaching the limits of what the universe could endure. Suddenly, a mass of chaotic chi currents rushed towards Yi Chen. Even with Yi Chen's methods, it was hard for him to evade. The chaotic chi currents had already surpassed space-time, and there was no possibility of evading. unless Yi Qin's cultivation was comparable to the paragon of the three realms. The chaotic qi currents didn't annihilate Yi Qin's body and soul. Yi Qin entered a different space. Within this space was a vast sea of stars, as well as a white-robed, white-browed middle-aged man. The three realms killing fist is the fusion of three supreme fist arts. In order, they are the heaven-killing fist, the earth-killing fist, and the mortal-killing fist. The heaven-killing fist is ethereal and formless. From tangible to intangible, it's all within a single thought. Take this. The middle-aged man didn't move, but his fist had already punched towards Yi Qin, as though he was using his own aura to attack. What was tangible? What was intangible? Everyone could understand the surface meaning, but not many could understand the deeper meaning. From Yi Qin's perspective, tangible meant that everything had to be done according to the rules. Intangible meant that it transcended the rules. But seriously speaking, there was no clear boundary between tangible and intangible. It all depended on one's heart. Therefore, the heaven-killing fist should be the power of the heart. The power of the heart could be strong or weak, and it was extremely strange to deal with it. Just like the middle-aged man, Yi Qin didn't move and started a counterattack. He counterattacked with his heart. What he thought in his heart would become reality here. In the outside world, Yi Qin didn't dare to do this because he couldn't do it. Boom, boom, boom. Without any signs, countless explosions occur between the two. The invisible battle had already begun. There was no concept of time in the alternate dimension. The two of them fought for an unknown period of time, and the sound of explosions gradually slowed down. You are worth teaching. Your heart is strong enough. Pass. The middle-aged man smiled faintly. His figure flickered, and a door appeared where he had been standing. Thank you for your guidance. Yi Qin entered the gate. The scene before Xiao Qin's eyes changed. It was no longer a vast sea of stars, but a boundless, chaotic land. Standing on the ground, Xiao Qin could sense the boundless power of the earth, able to bear everything. Earth realm killing fist, boundless chaos, boundless power, the pinnacle of power, the essence of the earth realm killing fist. There are no variations, is purely based on power. The middle-aged man appeared again and said to Yi Qin. Yi Qin fell in a deep thought. According to the middle-aged man's words, Yi Qin could roughly guess that the earth realm killing fist contained the profoundness of power. Of course, power was too abstract, and anything that moved had power. Thus, one needed to have enough capacity to contain this power. Out of all the things in the world, the earth was without a doubt the object with the greatest capacity. If one's heart was like the earth, then one would be able to bear all things. Take this. The middle-aged man clenched his right fist and punched out slowly. As this punch struck out, the entire ground seemed to be moving, squeezing towards Yi Qin. There was nowhere for him to hide. 5-element sword art, rise and fall. Facing this punch, Yi Qin could only use his strongest sword art to deal with it. The 5-element sword art's rise and fall were used, reversing the yin and yang and reversing the 5 elements. He tried his best to suppress the aura and power of the opponent's fist art. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Every time they exchanged blows, Yi Qin would take a step back. When the middle-aged man punched 10 times, Yi Qin would take 10 steps back. Too strong. The heaven realm killing fist is the power of the heart. It can be strong or weak. As long as one's heart is strong, one can pass. The earth realm killing fist is the power of heaven and earth. It is the pinnacle of power. If one wants to pass, one must break through the bottleneck. The 11th punch came. Yi Qin mustered up his sword yuan and threw out his sword attack. Boom! The ground was torn apart, and Yi Qin was sent flying. The 12th punch, the 13th punch, the 18th punch, the earth realm killing fist. Each punch was stronger than the last. There was no limit to the power, and the earth realm killing fist had no limit. The 19th punch. When the 20th punch came, Yi Qin felt that he was at his weakest. At this time, human strength was so small and not worth mentioning. However, human strength was limited, but mental strength was infinite. 5-element sword art, 5-element cut. His feet deeply rooted in the ground, Yi Chun roared. The flying heaven sword seemed slow, but it was fast as it slashed out. This sword's killing power was extremely terrifying. The five-colored sword, Qi, slashed across the ground, and the ground immediately collapsed, creating a deep ravine. In the end, it collided with the boundless fist energy. Boom! As if the world was being split open, a cluster of fire burst into the sky, like the first wisp of fire from the beginning of the world. It was so bright and shocking. At the last moment, Yi Chen finally made a breakthrough, and the five-element sword art advanced to the next level, comprehending the five-element cut. The five-element cut integrated the profound of the five elements into one sword, and it was controlled by the power of the heart. Without enough heart power, it would be impossible to use this sword. The understanding of the Heaven Realm Killing Fist was being integrated into Yi Chen's sword art. Good sword art. I hope you can continue to pass the human realm. The middle-aged man stepped aside. Through the light door, Yi Chen came to the last checkpoint, the human realm checkpoint. Just like before, the middle-aged man began to introduce the human realm killing fist. The human realm killing fist is unpredictable and extremely dangerous. Watch carefully. The middle-aged man punched out, and layers of fist energy shrouded Yi Chen. Just as Yi Chen was about to counterattack, all the fist energy suddenly merged into one, turning into a huge fist energy that directly attacked Yi Chen. At this time, Yi Chen's reaction was a beat slower, and his sword energy was not raised to the limit, so he was forced to take the attack. Puff! Spurting out a mouthful of blood, Yi Chen's entire person was sent flying out of the sky. The human realm killing fist lies in the word change. If you can't see through this word, you won't have a chance to counterattack. The middle-aged man attacked while explaining the mystery of the human realm killing fist. Change. Yi Chen frowned. In the past, he had always been proud of his fighting skills, but now he tasted the feeling of being suppressed. Once the opponent used the human realm killing fist, he didn't even have time to react. Every time, he didn't use his strongest power. Under such circumstances, the situation would become even more disadvantageous to him. What is change? Yi Chen began to think. The human realm killing fist was unpredictable and unpredictable. Sometimes it could even turn the impossible into the possible, and the possible into the impossible. It seemed that even the rules of heaven and earth couldn't restrict the human realm killing fist. The rules of heaven and earth. A light flashed in Yi Chen's mind. That's right, it was the rules of heaven and earth. Chapter 1258. The rules of heaven and earth bound all things. It was invisible, but it was also visible. It was invisible because its existence could not be felt, and it was visible because it could be seen everywhere. For example, the speed limit of the universe was the speed of light. If one wanted to surpass this speed, they could only teleport. However, teleportation was not purely speed. There were signs to it. If one could surpass the speed of light in an intense battle with a strong enemy, they would have the absolute upper hand. After all, once one's speed increased, all aspects affected by speed would be improved. The mortal world killing fist was unpredictable. In terms of transformation, it was no longer bound by the laws of heaven and earth. Of course, this space was originally formed by chaotic air currents, so the laws here were beneficial to the mortal world killing fist. However, who could say for sure that the real mortal world killing fist would be like this? If it was personally executed by the supreme of the three realms, the mortal world killing fist would definitely be millions of times stronger than it was now. If the heavens will capturing hand was the pinnacle of the universe's starry sky transformation, then the mortal world killing fist had vaguely surpassed this pinnacle, advancing towards an even higher level. Deal with the ever-changing by remaining unchanged. In terms of changes, Yi Chen's sword art could never be compared to the mortal realm killing fist. His current achievements in the five-element sword art were also limited. The sword light shone brightly. Yi Chen suddenly displayed the five-element sword art's ups and downs. With the use of waxing and waning, the mortal realm-killing fist's power and transformations began to decline. However, Yi Chen had still underestimated the danger of the mortal realm-killing fist. A large number of sword lights suddenly broke free from Yi Chen's control and gathered into the mortal realm-killing fist force, causing the mortal realm-killing fist to also have the effect of waxing and waning, which was reflected on Yi Chen. Amazing! Yi Chen sucked in a breath of cold air. The transformations of the human realm-killing fist were indeed beyond his expectations. It could actually transform the special effects of the opponent's martial arts for his own use. Wasn't this also one of the transformations? As a result, Yi Chen's 5-element sword art immediately collapsed. Who? As the wind from the punch blew past, Yi Chen's hair and clothes flew backward and stretched. Strangely, the wind from the punch did not seem to have any power. The middle-aged man stopped attacking. Congratulations, you've passed the test. You can enter the three-world mountain to receive the legacy. Yi Chen asked, Senior, I didn't pass the human realm's checkpoint. Why? The middle-aged man smiled and said, even an ordinary prime would not be able to pass through the mortal realm's checkpoint. You can also see that this involves the rules of the world. Since you know the crux of it, you have already passed. The three realms killing fist had its own advantages. Although the human realm killing fist seemed to be the most difficult to deal with, it was not necessarily the most powerful. The heaven realm killing fist focused on the strength of the heart. As long as the heart was strong, it was enough. The earth realm killing fist was more direct and did not have many changes. It was the source of power. The human realm killing fist was like the world of mortals. It had many changes and could not transcend the world of mortals. Naturally, it was difficult to deal with the human realm killing fist. The three-boundary mountain was so majestic that it was hard to tell if it was real or fake. Without the middle-aged man leading the way, Yi Chen wouldn't even be able to find the three-boundary mountain. After passing through the three-boundary monument and the three-boundary bridge, Yi Chen arrived at the path leading up the mountain. How much inheritance you can receive will depend on your own comprehension. Life was like a mountain. Everyone started from the bottom. In the supreme holy land, every mountain represented the life of a prime. The three-boundary mountain represented the life of the prime of the three realms. Walking on the path, Yi Chen saw the prime of the three realms when he was a child, when he was young. The prime of the three realms was completely different from Yi Chen's. The prime of the three realms was originally just an ordinary businessman. At a young age, he already had a lot of wealth. But in this world, wealth was no match for absolute power. After becoming penniless, the prime of the three realms began to walk the path of a martial artist. Originally, at his age, the path of martial arts basically had no future. But the reality was not like that. With shocking effort and perseverance, he managed to reach the mortal realm at the age of 35, the clasping yuan realm at the age of 50, the Sea of Souls realm at the age of 100, and the life and death realm at the age of 280. At the life and death realm, the prime of the three realms began to stand out, displaying incomparably frightening talent and comprehension. The mortal realm-killing fist was created by the prime of the three realms at the age of 1000. Then, he created the earth realm-killing fist at the age of 2000, the heaven realm-killing fist at the age of 5000, and at the age of 10,000, he raised the mortal realm-killing fist to a whole new level. At the age of 20,000, he mastered the three realms killing fist and became a rare supreme martial art. Evil sovereign, take this. Halfway up the mountain, near the peak, Yi Chen saw the most intense battle. The two sides of the battle were the paragons of the three realms and a paragon of the evil spirit race. It was obvious that the paragon of the evil spirit race was also an extremely powerful paragon. Although the fist technique he used was not as murderous as that of the paragon of the three realms, it was filled with an extreme evil aura. The evil path advocated freedom and did not distinguish between good and evil. Once it was used, the sky was filled with fist shadows against fist shadows. At this stage, even the heavenly Tao was affected and distorted. In the end, the three realms killing fist prevailed. It pierced through the layers of fist shadows and heavily injured the evil sovereign. There were a few more battles after that, and each battle was even better than the previous one. This was especially true for the battle against the Devil Race's paragon, the Dark Devil Lord. Both of them were the strongest experts of their respective races. To a certain extent, their strength had already reached or even surpassed the limits of the universe. The paragon of the three realms' three-realm killing fist could penetrate anything. No matter how tight the defense was, it would be useless against the three realms killing fist. The Dark Devil Lord's dark primal chaos immeasurable hands had extreme destructive power. The three realms killing fist and the dark primal chaos immeasurable hands were evenly matched. The prime of the three realms was struck by the Dark Demon Sovereign's palm, while the Dark Demon Sovereign was struck by the prime of the three realms. At the peak, the final battle between the prime of the three realms and the Dark Demon Sovereign began. At the final juncture of the battle, the Dark Demon Sovereign broke through his original realm and became an invincible existence below the true God realm, demigod. Although demigods were not true gods, they could still change the rules within their own domain and twist the heavenly Tao. Fortunately, demigods were beginning to be suppressed by the will of the universe. Although their battle prowess had increased by a lot, they were unable to unleash their true divine power. In this battle, the prime of the three realms fell. Before his death, the prime of the three realms, along with his entire body and soul, turned into a murderous aura that heavily injured the Dark Demon Sovereign. This caused the Dark Demon Sovereign to be expelled to an unknown place by the universe. The murderous aura that the prime of the three realms turned into traversed time and space and arrived at the supreme Holy Land. It turned into a mountain. This mountain was the Three Realms Mountain, so there are still demigods above the Supremes. I wonder if the prime of the three realms also used some special methods to enter the ranks of demigods. Demigods, as the name suggested, possessed some of the techniques of true gods. However, they were not true gods. The life experiences of the prime of the three realms slowly turned blurry in Yi Chen's mind. In the end, only the essence of the martial arts remained. Ordinary people would not be able to understand these essences. Some were just some symbols, some were lines, and some were just a few words. Those with insufficient comprehension abilities would not even be able to understand them, let alone comprehend them. Chapter 1259. Sitting cross-legged on the peak of the three-world mountain, Yi Chen did not move at all and entered the deepest level of meditation. The sovereign's inheritance was determined by the person. Some people could only obtain a part of the essence of the martial arts, while others could obtain most of it. Normally, the higher the comprehension, the higher the degree of completeness of the inheritance. Of course, there was another situation where the inheritor's martial arts were very similar to the inheritor's martial arts, or even the same. In this case, the inheritor might be able to receive the complete inheritance. The sovereign of the three worlds martial arts were naturally different from Yi Chen's, but what Yi Chen wanted was not the complete inheritance of the sovereign of the three worlds martial arts, but the other's understanding of martial arts. At Yi Chen's level, bitter training was no longer of much use. Sometimes a single comprehension might be equivalent to thousands of years of bitter training. Heaven Realm, Killing Fist. Earth Realm, Killing Fist. Mortal Realm, Killing Fist. In his mind, the three fist techniques of the sovereign of the three worlds martial arts kept replaying. Yi Chen had already comprehended the Heaven Realm Killing Fist, otherwise he would not have passed the Heaven Realm so easily. However, Yi Chen also knew that it was far from enough. The Heaven Realm Killing Fist could be strong or weak. When it was strong, it was even stronger than the Mortal Realm Killing Fist. His comprehension was not worth mentioning at all. To comprehend the essence of the three worlds Killing Fist, he had to start from the Heaven Realm Killing Fist, because the Heaven Realm Killing Fist focused on cultivating the heart. If the heart was not strong enough, he would not be able to control the three worlds Killing Fist. The sovereign level should require enough heart strength to cross over. For no reason, such a thought flashed in Yi Chen's mind. In the past, Yi Chen thought that training the heart was training the will, and a strong heart meant a strong will. But now Yi Chen did not think so. The heart was something on a deeper level. It was illusory, even more ethereal than the soul. A strong soul and a strong will did not mean that one would have a bright future, but a strong heart would at least mean that there would be hope. Once a life had thoughts, it would actually have dreams and aspirations. If a talented person did not have a competitive heart, then his future would definitely be limited. The bigger the heart, the bigger the future. If one's heart was limitless, their future would be limitless. After figuring this out, Yi Chen's body underwent a drastic change. At this moment, Yi Chen was still the same Yi Chen, but in front of him, a door had opened up. Once he stepped through the door, he would be able to reach the highest point of his life. Time passed like water. On the three-world mountain, Yi Chen had been sitting there with his legs crossed without moving. However, if anyone had been present, they would have noticed that the area around Yi Chen was being refracted. These refractions weren't simple refractions, such as light rays, but rather the refractions of one's heart. Gradually, the refractions grew stronger and stronger, until sword techniques began to appear. Some of these sword techniques were strong, and some were weak. The weaker ones were comparable to ordinary sword techniques, while the stronger ones were comparable to paragons. The heart could change. In other words, the strength of the heart would fluctuate. When the fluctuations were low, the strength would naturally be the weakest. When the fluctuations were high, the strength would be unimaginable. The power of the Heaven Realm Killing Fist was that it could maintain the fluctuation of one's heart at a relatively high level, raising it to its peak. As for how much one could raise it, it depended on how far one could walk in the realm of one's heart. Bang! Suddenly, a corner of Three-World Mountain was chopped off. In the next moment, it instantly recovered, as if it was just an illusion. All things are empty. Whether it's real or fake, it's not important. What's important is whether it's what one thinks in one's heart. Slowly, Yi Chen stood up. In terms of cultivation base, Yi Chen hadn't improved in the slightest. However, the current Yi Chen was countless times more dangerous than the Yi Chen of the past. Although he was standing there, he seemed to be separated by countless different spaces, separating dream and reality, real and fake. It was truly hard to distinguish what was real and what was fake. At this moment, Yi Chen had reached the highest realm of Sword Dao, Heart Sword Realm. Sword Dao Realm. From the lowest sword in the hand to the sword in the heart, each step was extremely difficult. Of course, at the 8th layer of Life and Death Realm, almost everyone had reached this realm. Even if they were strong, they would not be that strong. It would not be easy to defeat others just because one Sword Dao realm was slightly higher. There were too many factors influencing one's strength, and Sword Dao realm was only one of them. However, Heart Sword was different. It was the highest realm of Sword Dao, a realm that even Supremes might not be able to easily grasp. Heart Sword was no longer attached to reality or illusion, true or false. To a certain extent, it had already transcended the heavenly Tao and was on par with it. What Yi Chen didn't know was that the strength of one's heart was actually the key to becoming a true god. Only the heart could transcend the heavenly Tao and not be bound by it. Of course, Yi Chen had only just entered Heart Sword Realm, which was not enough to be on par with the heavenly Tao. Even the Supremes of the three realms couldn't challenge the heavenly Tao. If they could, then he would be a true god. The stronger the heart, the stronger the sword art. Taking out his flying sword, Yi Chen performed his 5-element sword art in a standard manner. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Sword light spread out, gradually distorting the rules of the Three-World Mountain. However, since the Three-World Mountain was formed by the Supremes of the three realms, the power of the heart was even more powerful. Thus, the 5-element sword arts could only slightly distort the rules. If it were in the outside world, the 5-element sword arts containing the power of the heart would be frightening and could easily distort the rules. 5 elements cut. Sucking in a deep breath, Yi Chen suddenly used the 5 elements cut. A 5-colored sword light crazily slashed out. For a moment, lightning and thunder rumbled on the Three-World Mountain, and space-time shattered. It was as if the primal chaos had transformed into stars. I didn't expect you to comprehend the power of the heart so quickly. You are indeed a promising talent. The middle-aged man's figure appeared and faintly nodded. After the sword attack, the sword aura on Yi Chen's body was like a deflated balloon. It immediately withered. After all, he had just entered the heart sword realm, and the power of the heart was still unstable. No wonder the heavens will capturing hand is so unpredictable. It must contain a powerful heart force. Using one's heart to replace the heart of the heavens, it is naturally omnipotent. However, compared to the three-world killing fist, it is probably much weaker. It's just that I have never seen the real three-world killing fist. Yi Chen knew very well that the three-world killing fist was very dangerous. It was fine when it was not used, but once it was used, it would kill. The fist energy of the fist art had already transformed into an eternal killing intent. For the heaven-killing fist, Yi Chen had already learned it. He had even comprehended the highest realm of the sword Tao, the heart sword. Next, it was the earth-killing fist and the human-killing fist. The earth-killing fist was the extreme of power. First, one had to understand the existence of power, then turn the power of heaven and earth into one's own power to attack the enemy. The first step should be to comprehend the profound of power. Only then can I get twice the result with half the effort. Generally speaking, the profound of time and the profound of space were the highest profounds. However, in front of the profound of power, the profound of time and the profound of space were not as good. The flow of time contained power, and the maintenance of space also contained power. Power could be said to be everywhere. It was the link between heaven and earth. Power was everywhere, so it was even harder to comprehend. If one could comprehend the profound of power, they might be able to comprehend the profound of time. There was a necessary connection between the two. Chapter 1260. Although the power profound was not inferior to the time profound and space profound, it was still quite easy to comprehend in the early stages. Especially after obtaining the essence of the Earth Realm Killing Fist, Yi Chen didn't need to accumulate a lot of the original foundation and directly push the power profound to 70% completion. Currently, when he used the same sword arts, its might would be much higher than before. Each move and style would be the pinnacle of his own power. When the profound of strength reached 90%, the understanding of the profound of strength in Yi Chen's mind was completely exhausted. For any profound, after 90%, it would be a forbidden area. This was especially true for the profound of strength. It could be said that after 90%, the profound of strength was the true essence of the profound. The others were still external. Regarding the profound of strength, one had to truly comprehend it. There were no shortcuts. If one didn't know, then they didn't know. This wasn't like the heart sword. So Yi Chen immediately stopped comprehending the profound of strength. However, the profound of strength at 90% already made Yi Chen very satisfied. What made him even more surprised was that the appearance of the profound of strength had allowed the profound of time to be born from the profound of space. Currently, the profound of time was still very low, and its progress was also very slow. However, it had already reached 20%. Although the profound of strength was better than the profound of time, in terms of difficulty, the profound of time was harder to comprehend. There were several reasons for this. First, after comprehending the profound of space, the difficulty of comprehending the profound of time would increase by 10 times. This was different from metal, wood, water, fire, earth, light and darkness, and even yin and yang. Once the profound of space and time were combined, even if it didn't create a proper profound of time and space, it would still be very abnormal and could even produce unexpected changes. Time and space were the framework of a world. It was clearer and brighter, so it was easier to produce a terrifying chain reaction. As for metal, wood, water, fire, earth, light and darkness, and yin and yang, they needed to combine and evolve in order to burst out a power that was not inferior to that of time and space. As for the esoteric of strength, it was independent, but it wasn't. It was said to be independent because it didn't have any esoteric that could be combined with it. Therefore, in a one-on-one battle, it was the strongest. However, compared to the space-time esoteric, the five elements esoteric, and the yin-yang esoteric, it was much weaker. It wasn't independent because the esoteric of strength could be used in any aspect. It could also be combined with the space-time esoteric. For example, the three realms killing fist contained the yin-yang esoteric and the esoteric of strength. Becoming a true god wasn't easy. Even becoming a demigod was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Even if one didn't know everything, they had to be able to evolve everything they knew to the limit. When the esoteric of time reached 20%, the power of the momentary brilliance increased by thousands of times. When the sword slashed out, a dense sword net of death enveloped time and space, slicing through everything. If it was said to be similar to space-time slicing in the past, then now it was a real space-time slicing. Its power wasn't inferior to the five-element sword technique at all. It was only slightly inferior to the ultimate move of the five-element sword technique, the five-element slash. It sounded a little exaggerated. After all, the esoteric of time was only 20%, while the five-element sword technique contained 5 kinds of esoteric to perfection. However, the space-time esoteric was very clear and could naturally make up for each other's flaws, causing a terrifying chain reaction. On the other hand, the five-element sword technique seemed to contain 5 kinds of esoteric to perfection, but Yi Chun had no way to continue increasing their power in a short period of time. It could be said that the momentary brilliance had dug out the potential of the space-time esoteric, while the five-element sword technique had only dug out the surface of the five elements esoteric. The two couldn't be compared. This was also why the esoteric of time was so difficult to comprehend. However, the current momentary brilliance was no longer suitable to be called momentary brilliance. After adding the esoteric of time, the nature of the sword technique had the attribute of cutting through everything. Let's call it the cut of death. In terms of profoundness, the cut of death was not as strong as the five-element sword technique. In terms of destructive power, the cut of death was not as strong as the slash of five elements. However, the terrifying thing about the cut of death was that it was extremely difficult to dodge. It almost cut off any escape route for the enemy. In front of the cut of death, time and space were just a relatively large piece of cheese, and the enemy would be trapped in time and space no matter what, unless their realm far surpassed each end's. Now that the esoteric of power had reached 90% completion, the next step was to analyze the mortal killing fist. The mortal killing fist was about transformation. The purpose of transformation was to make the enemy at a loss for what to do. Perhaps it was similar to the cut of death, but it couldn't be forgotten that if the enemy's attainment in the space-time esoteric was higher than Yi Chen's, then the cut of death would no longer be overwhelming. At that time, transformation was especially important. The limit of transformation theory was the limit of the rules. What Yi Chen needed to do was to approach this limit. As for surpassing the limit, Yi Chen didn't think about it. That was something that only legendary supremes could do. If he could do it, why would he need to accept the inheritance of the Three Realm Supremes in Three Realm Mountain? At the peak of Three Realm Mountain, a gale suddenly blew. Poof! With the flying heaven sword in hand, Yi Chen suddenly stabbed out. In an instant, 77,000 sword holes appeared on the boulder in front of him. If he wanted to have exquisite transformation, he first had to have sufficient speed. According to the essence of the mortal killing fist, Yi Chen set 3 goals for himself. The first goal was to stab 100,000 sword holes in an instant. The second goal was to stab 300,000 sword holes in an instant. The third goal was to stab 1 million sword holes in an instant. In fact, there was also the final goal, which was to stab countless sword holes in an instant. However, that was a goal that surpassed the rules and was not within the scope of consideration at the moment. Although Yi Chen's movement speed had reached the speed of light, and his sword speed was also at the speed of light, the frequency at which he swung his sword was too high, and the speed of his sword would be greatly reduced. Unleashing 77,000 sword attacks in an instant was not something that ordinary people could do. The essence of the mortal killing fist was to make it easier for him to unleash more punches. 80,000. 85,000, 90,000, 100,000. After an unknown period of time, Yi Chun finally completed the first goal. With a swing of his sword, 100,000 sword holes were densely arranged on the boulder. This was not the end. On the contrary, it was just the beginning. After an unknown amount of time, Yi Chun waved his sword out, but he could still only stab out 100,000 times. However, these 100,000 sword holes could form a complicated pattern. Some looked like a blooming flower, which would continuously bloom and then wither without an end. Some looked like ripples in the water, constantly spreading out. When Yi Chun began to move towards the second goal, he instantly stabbed 210,000 times. This was the result of using the sword holes to form complex patterns. Very smoothly, the second goal was also completed. Yi Chun began to carve words on the boulder. These words were all formed by sword holes. After carving many words, Yi Chun was not satisfied. In the end, Yi Chun chose to carve the word sword. The word sword appeared one after another, and above the word sword, sword chi soared into the sky. If ordinary life and death swordsmen saw these sword words, their sword Dao would definitely soar to the next level. This was because each sword word contained too many sword Dao insights. Chapter 1261. Yi Chun only stopped after carving a total of 108,000 sword characters. Three-World Mountain was filled with huge rocks, and each of them had a sword character on it. After the relatively ordinary Three-World Mountain was carved with the sword character, the aura it exuded became sharp, like peerless swords standing there. The changes were not only in quantity, but also in essence. If these sword characters didn't have any essence in them, then it would be Yi Chun's failure. Among the many rocks, there was one that was very unique. It wasn't because of the uniqueness of the rocks, but because of the sword character on it. There were 108,000 sword characters on it. This sword character looked exactly the same as the other sword characters on the other rocks, but the sword chi it gave off was even denser, almost as thick as water, shaking time and space. Feeling this sword chi, it was as if countless sword techniques were surging over. It was similar to the murderous intent of the three-world killing fist. Of course, the three-world killing fist was a supreme martial art, and the gap between the two was so huge that it couldn't be calculated with common sense. I could start on the third target. Looking at the 108,000 sword characters, Yi Chun slowly retracted his gaze and waved his hand. All the rocks sank down. Three-World Mountain wasn't an ordinary mountain, and it could change according to Yi Chun's will. Otherwise, ordinary rocks wouldn't be able to withstand 300,000 swords from Yi Chun. The first sword would cut it into nothingness. The wind howled, but it couldn't disturb Yi Chun's heart. Puffed. The first rock rose up, and Yi Chun stabbed it with his sword. As if time had gone haywire, the number of sword holes on the rock increased rapidly. Because the speed was too fast, it looked as if they had appeared out of thin air. 580,000 swords. Carving characters allowed Yi Chun to improve rapidly, and he could stab out 580,000 swords in an instant. But this wasn't enough. Far from it. 600,000 swords. 650,000 swords. 700,000 swords. 750,000 swords. 800,000 swords. 900,000 swords. Time flowed like water, quietly passing by. After reaching 900,000 thrusts in an instant, his progress slowed down to a horrifying degree. With every 1,000 thrusts, his soul power would begin to be consumed. Yi Chun didn't expect that this would consume soul power. 910,000 swords. 920,000 swords. 930,000. When he reached 930,000 swords, Yi Chun's progress became even slower. After an unknown amount of time, he would only add another 100 or 200 swords. It was extremely strenuous. Fortunately, progress was still being made. 940,000. 950,000. 960,000. I'm almost at my limit. Yi Chun looked exhausted and couldn't help but swallow a magnificent violet soul refining pill. In the blink of an eye, he had unleashed 960,000 swords. Yi Chun's soul force was being consumed very quickly. It was almost as if he was using an ordinary soul attack. If not for the magnificent violet soul, refining pill replenishing his soul force, he might not have been able to maintain it. Apart from that, his current progress was so slow that it made people's hair stand on end. Basically, he was increasing his soul force by a few swords. At 970,000 swords, he would be increasing his soul force by one sword at a time. Yi Chen's guess was right. At 970,000 swords, it was indeed an increase of one sword at a time. Finally, 980,000 swords. One sword, one world. One sword, one dust. In the following time, Yi Chen entered a mysterious realm. It was like when he stabbed out a sword. It was no longer a simple sword, but a sword that contained everything. And this sword that contained everything would eventually turn into a dust. Everything in the world is just a dust. With a sigh in his heart, Yi Chen's eyes became firmer. Pooh! On the giant stone, 999,900 swords suddenly appeared. These 999,900 sword holes formed a word that no one could recognize. This was the sword word that Yi Chen had created. Looking at it seriously, it looked like the change word. It looked like a sword but not a sword, like change but not change. This was a sword word that could change. It could also be said that it was a word that was displaying a sword art. Chi, 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 chi. What Yi Chen didn't expect was that this strange sword word would suddenly come to life. It turned into a peerless sword art and attacked Yi Chen. Every move was so exquisite and hard to dodge. Even Yi Chen was a little caught off guard. He was attacked until he kept retreating, unable to fight back. Could this be a phenomenon caused by approaching the limit of change? Yi Chen guessed in his heart. The essence of change was that it was alive and not dead. When the sword stabbed out, it was a spiritual world. Everything in the world was in it. Thousands of changes were also in it. It was equivalent to having one's own wisdom. However, this wisdom was imposed by oneself, which gave him a certain degree of autonomy. No wonder the mortal world-killing fist was so hard to resist. It was incredible. When the change reached that level, it was really turning the rotten into the magical, turning the impossible into the possible. Ding ding dang dang. After all, it contained his own sword art. Although Yi Chen was caught off guard, he wouldn't be defeated. After a few breaths, Yi Chen had already turned the situation around. Omniscient nature, wandering. With a sharp look in his eyes, Yi Chen performed the most transformative sword attack. This sword, omniscient nature, was like a dream. Walala. The strange sword word returned to its original position as if it had never moved. Putting the flying sword back into its scabbard, Yi Chen slowly let out a breath. 999,900 swords is already my limit. The next 100 swords are a forbidden zone for now, a forbidden zone that goes against the rules. I reckon that I'll have to break through in all aspects before I can truly reach the million swords realm. Omniscient nature was all-encompassing. It blurred the boundary between reality and illusion. For the current Yi Chen, it was enough. The 5-element sword art had its ups and downs. 5 elements sword arts 5 elements / 5 elements sword arts omniscient nature. Space-time sword arts death cut. Before entering the supreme holy land, Yi Chen's supreme sword art had yet to reach a higher level. But now he had 4 supreme sword arts. Each of them was no longer so immature and had its essence. These 4 sword arts each had their own characteristics. Ups and downs could weaken the enemy's attack power and attack changes. 5 elements / was an extreme sword, combining the 5 elements into one. Omniscient nature contained the world's myriad forms and was close to the extreme of change. Death / cut through time and space like cutting through cheese, sealing off all the enemy's escape routes. Even if one could dodge in time, they wouldn't be able to because this sword even sealed time. Not bad. You have stayed on 3-World Mountain for a total of 10 3-world years. The middle-aged man appeared. 3 world years. Yi Chen was puzzled. 3-World Mountain's sense of time is blurry. 10 3-world years is equivalent to 100 years in the outside world. The middle-aged man explained. So, it has been 100 years. Yi Chen sighed. In the blink of an eye, 100 years had passed. But here, the sense of time was too blurry, to the point that he neglected the existence of time. Time and space are two of the meanings of life. When you can ignore time and space one day, you would either be dead or you would have become a demigod. I hope it's the latter. Smiling, the middle-aged man continued, I can see the entanglement of fate in you. Your opponents are all very powerful, far stronger than before. Go, in this world, there will always be a few years that are especially exciting. It's time for fate to collapse, for gods and devils to fight each other. The middle-aged man waved his hand. Yi Chen instantly vanished from Three World Mountain. Before he left, Yi Chen knew that this middle-aged man was the paragon of the three realms. He died after becoming a demigod. Yi Chen didn't know how powerful a demigod was, but Yi Chen could imagine that even if a demigod died, he would still be alive to a certain extent. Chapter 1262. The Supreme of the Three Realms waved his hand and sent Yi Chen to the periphery of the supreme sacred ground. The exit was right next to him. At this moment, there were already many people like Yi Chen waiting for the exit to open. The opening time of the supreme sacred ground's exit wasn't fixed. It would only open when the last inheritor left the mountain. Otherwise, they could only wait here. Yi Chen, Murong Qingsheng, and Su Jing had already received the inheritance. When they saw Yi Chen, their figures flashed and they flew over. How are you guys? Yi Chen asked. Murong Qingsheng replied, I received Supreme Rose's inheritance. I received Supreme Dragon's inheritance. Su Jing also said, Supreme Rose was a powerful Supreme from 3 million years ago, while Supreme Dragon was a Super Supreme from 50 million years ago. The former's light and dark rose palm could allow one to ignore the existence of time and age indefinitely. The latter was the pride of the dragon race, and his Dragon Wings Wisdom Palm and Dragon Wings Taishu were famous all over the world. Whose inheritance did you receive? Murong Qingsheng guessed that Yi Chen must have received the inheritance of a sword venerable. Supreme of the Three Realms. Supreme of the Three Realms? Su Jing frowned. Supreme of the Three Realms wasn't a sword venerable, but he was stronger than most sword venerables. He was one of the 7 legendary Supremes of the human race. If Yi Chen could fully understand the Supreme of the Three Realms killing fist, and turn it into his own sword technique, he would at least become a legendary Supremes. Haha, Yi Chen, you're out too. It seems that you've received the inheritance. The Golden Robe Emperor laughed and flew over. Yi Chen still had a good impression of the Golden Robe Emperor. You must have gained quite a lot too, right? Just so. You should have heard of the Golden Supremes, right? Yi Chen thought for a while and shook his head. The Golden Robe Emperor smiled bitterly and was about to explain. Su Jing interrupted. The leakless Golden Supremes. He was a Supreme from 1 billion years ago. That's right. The Golden-Robed Emperor smiled. Although the Golden Sovereign wasn't a legend sovereign had once said that under the same conditions, he wasn't a match for the Golden Sovereign. The Golden Sphere could be said to be the most frightening defensive method. It was flawless. Right, what about you? The Golden-Robed Emperor looked at Yi Chen. As for Su Jing and Murong Qingsheng, they were completely ignored by the Golden-Robed Emperor. He treated them as Yi Chen's confidants. The paragon of the Three Realms. The Golden-Robed Emperor sucked in a breath of cold air. You freak. You even found the tomb of a legendary paragon, and it was one of the 7 legendary paragons of the human race. Gold Supremes were very famous. They were equivalent to ordinary legendary Supremes. However, compared to the Supremes of the Three Realms, they were more than a level lower. Even under the same conditions, the Three Realms killing fist could pierce through the golden circle. The former's attack was simply unblockable. Now that you mention it, my hands are getting a little itchy. Why don't we have a spar? There's still some time before the exit of the Supreme Holy Land opens. The Golden-Robed Emperor suggested. He really wanted to know how much of the Three Realms Supreme's inheritance Yi Chen had obtained. Of course, the most important thing was to test out his own gains. All right, the Golden-Robed Emperor's suggestion tempted Yi Chen. Look, the Golden-Robed Emperor is about to fight someone. Who is it? He can actually fight against the golden-robed emperor. He is one of the 4 young paragons. He looks even younger than the golden-robed emperor. I guess the latter wants to give him some pointers. The two flew into the sky, facing each other from a distance. Everyone in the vicinity immediately cast their gazes over. The eyesight of an 8th-level life and death realm heavenly emperor was extremely sharp. However, most of them didn't recognize Yi Chun. Of course, some of them had heard of Yi Chun's name, but they didn't associate this blue-robed youngster with Yi Chun. In their opinion, Yi Chun's progress shouldn't be this fast. To be able to fight against the golden-robed emperor, even with the latter's guidance, he should at least have the strength of a peak emperor warrior. Yi Chun, be careful. My heaven-covering staff arts have improved a lot. Your 5-element sword arts might not be able to block it. The golden-robed emperor warned. Yi Chun casually said, "Bring it on." That might not be the case. All right, take this. The golden-robed emperor didn't hold back. The moment the golden staff appeared, a majestic aura soared into the sky like a beacon. In the next moment, the golden-robed emperor leaped high into the sky and brandished his staff. Countless staff shadows blotted out the sky, replacing the heaven and earth. It was as if he wanted to change the world and rebuild it. It's indeed several times stronger than before. Before, the golden-robed emperor's heaven-covering staff arts weren't this powerful. Now, the heaven-covering staff arts had fewer flaws. But my 5-element sword arts aren't what they used to be. Pulling out the flying heaven sword, Yi Chun brandished his sword and used the 5-element sword arts. The 5-element sword arts were quite powerful in terms of defense. After obtaining the essence of the 3 realms Paragon's martial arts, Yi Chun's 5-element sword arts foundation had risen to a whole new level. The 5 elements rotated and there were no flaws. When it was used, it turned into a white ball of light that enveloped Yi Chun. Bang, 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 bang. Endless explosions rang out. The heaven-covering staff arts attacks were natural, and ordinary defenses were useless. Unfortunately, the 5-element sword arts couldn't be underestimated either. The two were locked in a stalemate. All right, heaven-covering staff arts. The golden-robed emperor was decisive in dealing with such a defensive sword art. In an instant, the countless staff shadows merged into one, forming a giant staff that swept toward Yi Chun. 5 elements slash. Naturally, Yi Chun didn't dare to use ordinary 5-element sword arts to defend against the heaven-covering staff arts. The white ball of light disappeared, and a 5-colored sword aura shot out to meet the giant staff. Boom! The two of them retreated rapidly, and the shockwaves came one after another, causing those who were close to them to be thrown off their feet. The golden-robed emperor's eyes turned solemn. He didn't expect that Yi Chun would improve so quickly after receiving the inheritance. Back then, Yi Chun was still a bit weaker than him. Yi Chun, in the past 80 years, I've not only improved the heaven-covering staff arts to a new level, but I've also integrated the essence of the Gold Paragon's martial arts to create the Golden Staff arts. Compared to the heaven-covering staff arts, my Golden Staff arts aren't as good as the Gold Paragon's in terms of fire control, but it's more lethal, faster, and more ferocious. Although the sparring between the two of them wouldn't be life-threatening, the golden-robed emperor didn't want to hurt Yi Chun. So before he used the Golden Staff arts, he told Yi Chun the characteristics of the Golden Staff arts. This golden-robed emperor sure is straightforward. Yi Chun nodded and said, "Next, I'll use the space-time sword art, Death Slash." Death Slash. The golden-robed emperor was stunned, and then he smiled and said, "All right, I've underestimated you." Roar! Suddenly, a dazzling golden light burst from the golden-robed emperor's body, and the golden light gave off a wild feeling that disrespected heaven and earth. At that moment, the golden-robed emperor seemed to have changed into a different person, and his eyes were filled with aggression. Buzz! Hong Zhong's loud voice sounded, and the golden-robed emperor flew toward Yi Chun like lightning. The next moment, the golden light fanned out toward Yi Chun, and the shadows of the staff were everywhere. I wonder how he's going to block it. The purple-robed emperor, the white-robed emperor, and the green-robed emperor were all watching the battle. Chapter 1263. What a ferocious staff technique. Yi Chen's eyes narrowed. Supreme martial arts all had their own specialties. Although the five-element slash was powerful, it was too monotonous and couldn't block the golden staff technique at all. On the other hand, the death cut was a concentrated attack that sealed space and time. The golden staff technique can permeate space and time. It's not that easy to block. The golden-clad emperor was very confident in the golden staff technique. In terms of smoothness, the golden staff technique couldn't compare to the heaven-covering staff technique, but in terms of penetration and lethality, the heaven-covering staff technique couldn't compare. All of a sudden, clang, 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 sparks exploded between the two, as if there were countless Yi Chan fighting against countless golden-clad emperors. What? He blocked it? The golden-clad emperor was shocked. Golden-clad emperor, didn't I say that my death cut is a space-time sword technique? As long as you're within the space-time range of my sword technique, you won't be able to escape. Yi Chan smiled. Indeed, the golden-clad emperor nodded. At this point, he had to admit that Yi Chan was already on the same level as him. Of course, he didn't know that Yi Chan had already comprehended the heart sword realm. If he could use it, Yi Chen's strength would skyrocket. In addition, Yi Chan also had a boundless nature. Supreme martial arts didn't focus on how powerful they were. No matter how powerful they were, if they couldn't hit the enemy, then it would be useless. Supreme martial arts focused on absoluteness, or absolute power, or absolute undodgeability, or absolute defense. Although boundless nature couldn't be considered absolute, it could be considered absolute in the quasi-zune realm. It was even more terrifying than the powerful five-element slash, and even more unfathomable than the death cut. Golden-clad emperor, do you still want to fight? Yi Chan could tell that the golden-clad emperor wasn't going to fight anymore. He had probably used up all his tricks. As for his other tricks, he probably hadn't mastered them yet. After all, he had to absorb the inheritance he had obtained. It was already praiseworthy that he was able to create the golden staff technique. I don't want to fight anymore. You're really a monster. Among the humans, you can almost be called the number one sword emperor. In the human race, the sword emperor and the saber emperor were more controversial. Up until now, the title of sword emperor had not appeared. It was not an exaggeration to say that Yi Chan was the sword emperor. Sword emperor? Yi Chan smiled but didn't say anything. Yi Chan is amazing. He's actually able to fight to a draw with the golden-robed emperor. The golden-robed emperor is one of the 4 young quasi-sovereigns of the human race, and he's one of the top ones on the list. Everyone heard the golden-robed emperor call out Yi Chen's name, and they knew that he was the genius leader of the paradise of gods. Almost everyone in the top 30 of the quasi-sovereign ranking is an invincible quasi-sovereign. This Yi Chan just came out of the paradise of gods. TSK. He can be considered the number 1 genius of this epic. An epic was 10 million years. It's not just this epic. There wasn't such a monstrous genius in the last epic either. However, it's still unknown whether or not he can continue to be this monstrous. After all, if he doesn't become a supreme being, everything else will be meaningless. Right, since he doesn't have the Sword Emperor title yet, why don't we give it to Yi Chan? Someone suggested, ordinary titles could be chosen by oneself, but a prestigious title like Sword Emperor had to be acknowledged by everyone. Who here wasn't an influential figure among 8th layer life and death heavenly kings? Many of them were even quasi-sovereigns. With their acknowledgement, Yi Chen's Sword Emperor title would be confirmed. As for whether or not he could keep the title, it had nothing to do with them. I think it's feasible. The human race hasn't had a Sword Emperor for a long time. He might be able to keep it. Many people agreed. Haha, I'm Ru Ez. You must be Yi Chan, right? Your reputation is well-deserved. We'll give you a title, but I wonder if you dare to accept it. An aged quasi-sovereign walked out. He was very happy to see the rise of the younger generation. With the great war between humans and demonic beasts at hand, having a bit more power would be beneficial to everyone. However, the prerequisite was whether or not Yi Chan had the courage. What title? Yi Chan glanced over. Sword Emperor. Ru Ez unblinkingly stared at Yi Chan. Yichen wasn't too surprised. Everyone's conversation just now wasn't concealed, so he said, I'm indebted to everyone for looking up to me. If I say no, it would make me look like a fake Taishu. Sword Emperor title, Yichen will take it. Good. Indeed, heroes come from youngsters. Ru Easy laughed heartily. Sword Emperor Yichen is truly enviable. Some people are innately dazzling, and no matter how low-key they are, they can't do it. But there are still some Sword Emperors in the human race. Apart from them, there are also a few Sword Emperors in the foreign races. I reckon that they will also want to kill Yichen. Sword Emperor is naturally unique. Therefore, he must be unique among Sword Emperors as well. Hearing everyone's discussion, the golden-robed emperor smiled and said to Yichen, Now, your Sword Emperor title is set in stone. Actually, he meant to say that Yichen was the #1 Sword Emperor. It would be too unreasonable for such a genius to not have a title of his own. However, you also have to be careful. There are 4 Sword Emperors on the Quasi-Venerables list. They're the 48th Boundless Sword Emperor, the 27th Chijue Sword Emperor, the 13th Knight Sword Emperor, and the 4th Evil Sword Emperor. The former is not much of a threat, but the Chijue Sword Emperor cannot be underestimated. As for the Yiksha race's Knight Sword Emperor and the Evil Spirit race's Evil Sword Emperor, they are your true enemies. Now, the Quasi-Venerables list was basically monopolized by youngsters. Among the 4 Sword Emperors, only the Boundless Sword Emperor was older. The other 3 were all youngsters. I'll be careful. Yichen nodded. He naturally wouldn't be careless, especially after the Supreme Holy Land opened. It had to be known that not only did the human race have a Supreme Holy Land, but the demons also had a land of divinity and demons. The Evil Spirit race had a land of evil spirits, the Barbarian race had a wild Holy Land, and the Giant race had a giant spirit graveyard. In terms of perception, he was not afraid of anyone. However, others had cultivated for much longer than him. Moreover, at his current realm, sometimes a momentary difference was not the true difference. In short, the further one went, perception, opportunity, and time were all indispensable. Sword Emperor? What a joke. How many years has a boy cultivated? Yet he dares to call himself Sword Emperor. Right at this moment, a cold and slightly aged voice sounded out. Everyone looked over. It's the white-boned Sword Emperor. Someone recognized the person's identity. The white-boned Sword Emperor was one of the previous generation's Sword Emperors. Because he had not appeared for many years, he had always been in seclusion, so his name was not on the Quasi-Venerables list. However, no one dared to underestimate him, because 30,000 years ago, he was also ranked high on the Quasi-Venerables list. Although he was a human, he had always been harsh. Perhaps it was related to the cultivation technique he cultivated. He cultivated the yin-yang white-bone sword art, and his true essence was sinister and crafty. Chapter 1264. Yichen, the first one to challenge you, has appeared. This white-bone Sword Emperor hasn't appeared for 30,000 years. I'm not sure how strong he is right now. 30,000 years ago, his white-bone-time sword art was one of the fastest quasi-sovereigns. Now that 30,000 years have passed, he should be even stronger. Be careful. Golden-robed Emperor didn't want to stick up for Yichen. After all, Yichen's current status was no lower than his. Forcefully sticking up for him would only be superfluous. If Yichen wanted to keep the title of Sword Emperor, he could only rely on himself. I know what I'm doing. Yichen nodded and looked at the white-boned Sword Emperor. The title of Sword Emperor is due to everyone's praise. But since Senior White-Boned Sword Emperor cares so much, I can give it to you. Give it to me? The white-boned Sword Emperor was a little surprised and mocked. I thought you had some guts, but you're only a so-so. But since you're so tactful, I won't make things difficult for you. The white-boned Sword Emperor had been in seclusion for 30,000 years, and he thought that his progress was godly. This time, he came out for 2 reasons. Firstly, he wanted to find his own inheritance in the Supreme Holy Land, and secondly, he wanted to tell everyone that he, the white-boned Sword Emperor, had come out of seclusion. As for the position of Sword Emperor, he was determined to obtain it. What made him even more confident was that during this trip to the Supreme Holy Land, he had finally obtained a supreme inheritance. Although the deceased supreme was only an ordinary supreme, to a quasi-supreme like him who had lived for many years, it was undoubtedly like adding wings to a tiger. Yi Chun smiled. I said I'll give it to you, but you need to be strong enough to take it. Otherwise, it'll be too much of a joke. This Yi Chun is really relaxed, as if he doesn't put the white-boned Sword Emperor in his eyes. Youngsters are more insolent. But that's right, if they don't, they wouldn't be youngsters. Yes, being arrogant is the right thing to do. I wonder how the white-boned Sword Emperor will respond. Hearing Yi Chun's words, the surrounding people couldn't help but laugh. Junior, you're too arrogant. The white-boned Sword Emperor's face darkened. His eyes flickered and suddenly, a black and white sword light shot out. This was the Eye Sword art that contained a soul attack. Pop! Unfortunately, the moment the black and white sword light appeared, it was annihilated by the golden light emitted from between Yi Chun's eyebrows. When it came to soul attacks, Yi Chun wasn't afraid of anyone below the Supreme Being level. White-boned Sword Emperor, please advise me. Yi Chun didn't waste any more words. He knew that he had to defeat the white-boned Sword Emperor today. Very well, let me have a taste of your skills. Based on the strength of Yi Chun and the golden-clothed Emperor, the white-boned Sword Emperor had a 70% chance of defeating Yi Chun. It had to be known that they were both peak existences among quasi-sovereigns, so a 70% chance of victory was not a small amount. Buzz! The white-boned Sword Emperor did not directly attack, and only closed his eyes. When he opened them again, a powerful domain spread out, and because this domain was so powerful, it even started to become corporeal. The outer walls of the domain and the spatial barrier were filled with white bones that had countless sword runes on them. A sharp and terrifying aura spread out, permeating through space and time. The 8th level of Sword Domain, White-boned Sword Domain. What? The White-boned Sword Emperor's Sword Domain has broken through to the 8th level. This time, Yi Chun is in trouble. Although the Sword Domain is only a part of one's strength, if the difference between the two sword domains is too great, their strength will also be greatly affected. One side's strength will be amplified by the sword domain, while the other side's strength will be weakened by the sword domain. This battle is going to be very difficult. Everyone was shocked and couldn't help but look at Yi Chun. When Yi Chun fought with the golden-clothed Emperor, the sword domain only protected him and didn't spread out. Therefore, they didn't know what level Yi Chun's sword domain had reached. However, to be honest, they didn't think that Yi Chun's sword domain had also reached the 8th level. Under normal circumstances, the younger generation's sword domain would be slightly lower than the older generation. Only those who had cultivated for a long time could compete with the older generation. For example, the purple-clothed Emperor's sword domain had reached the 8th level, while Yi Chun had only cultivated for a few hundred years. I didn't expect this white-boned Sword Emperor to really amaze the world with a single brilliant feat, the golden-clothed Emperor frowned. He admitted that he had underestimated the white-boned Sword Emperor. If he was the one fighting with the white-boned Sword Emperor, the final result wouldn't be good. Of course, he still had a trump card that he hadn't used yet, and that was the golden orb of the Golden Sovereign. Once he used the golden orb, he would be able to protect himself. Su Jing and Murong Qingsheng, who were very familiar with Yi Chun, didn't have any changes in their expressions. This was because when the white-boned Sword Emperor revealed the 8th level of the sword domain, Yi Chun smiled. The others didn't notice it, but the two of them did. Do we still need to fight? The white-boned Sword Emperor said confidently. An ordinary sovereign sword domain was only at the 8th level. Of course, the majority of sovereign sword domains were at the late stage of the 8th level or even the peak stage of the 8th level. That might not be the case. Yi Chun's expression was indifferent. His blue clothes fluttered without any wind. Suddenly, an even more terrifying sword domain spread out. This sword domain was also at the 8th level. What was different from the past was that numerous azure lotuses bloomed in the sword domain, and within the lotuses were numerous peerless swords. The vast and boundless sword chi caused even space to ripple. What? It's also the 8th level of the sword domain? Everyone was shocked. How old was Yi Chun? His sword domain had actually reached the 8th level. What was even more inconceivable was that Yi Qin's sword domain seemed to be even more terrifying than the white-boned Sword Emperor's sword domain. The sword Dao contained within it was even purer. It's Sword Yuan. Using Sword Yuan to propel the sword domain is much more terrifying than using True Yuan. At this moment, those who didn't think that Yi Qin could keep the title of Sword Emperor were shaken. With the 8th level of the sword domain propelled by Sword Yuan, it wasn't impossible for Yi Qin to keep the title of Sword Emperor. Damn it, this kid has actually broken through to the 8th level as well. The white-boned Sword Emperor was secretly annoyed. He had no idea that Yi Qin's sword domain was originally only at the 6th level. Even after some improvements, it was only at the peak of the 6th level. However, after reaching the supreme realm of the Way of the Sword, the Heart Sword, Yi Qin's sword domain grew stronger every single day. In the end, it reached the early 8th level in one go. If he had enough time, it would be possible for him to reach the peak of the 8th level. The Heart Sword was the supreme realm of the Way of the Sword. It represented that Yi Qin had already touched upon the final mysteries of the Way of the Sword. Yi Qin used the 7th level of the sword domain in his battle against the gold-clothed emperor. After all, he didn't want to defeat the gold-clothed emperor so easily in front of everyone. Moreover, the gold-clothed emperor would definitely be holding back. Crackle. Their sword domains came into contact with each other, and countless sounds of destruction rang out. The white-boned sword domain was extremely impressive in terms of defense, while Yi Qin's green lotus sword domain was offensive. As soon as the two collided, it was like lightning striking the ground, erupting with an unprecedented shockwave. Chapter 1265. Crack! Crack! Just as everyone had expected, Yi Qin's green lotus sword realm was powered by Sword Yuan after all, which was much more stable and sharp than the white-boned sword emperor's white-boned sword realm. After a while, the white-boned sword realm started to crack, and the green lotus sword realm started to seep in. Oomph! The white-boned sword emperor snorted and put away his white-boned sword realm, only using it to protect himself. This way, the range would be smaller, but the defense would be much stronger. Yi Qin's green lotus sword realm wouldn't be able to do anything to him. Of course, there was a downside, which was that Yi Qin's green lotus sword realm had a wide range, which was enough to affect his condition. However, Yi Qin didn't rely on this. He also put away his green lotus sword realm to protect himself. White-boned sword emperor. Your white-bone times sword art is said to be one of the fastest sword arts among quasi-sovereigns. My death cleave contains the profound of time and space, which is also very fast. How about we compete? Although Yi Qin wouldn't look down on the white-boned sword emperor, he wouldn't think too highly of it either. With the heart sword realm, the white-boned sword emperor wouldn't be able to threaten him unless he was several times more powerful than the golden-robed emperor. As far as he was concerned, the white-boned sword emperor was a pretty good sparring partner. He had been training his sword arts on the Three Worlds Mountain, but if he wanted to perfect his sword arts, sparring with powerful opponents was also indispensable. Back then, the Three Worlds Killing Fist was able to shake the world, and it had a lot to do with his experience in battles. Take this. Without giving the opponent a chance to speak, Yi Qin flicked his wrist and performed the death cleave. In an instant, a dense net of swords spread out, covering the white-boned sword emperor. The death cleave contained perfect space profound and 20% time profound. In terms of trajectory, it was almost perfect. However, in terms of timing, it wasn't perfect. Yi Qin wanted to see how the white-boned sword emperor would break this sword. The golden-robed emperor couldn't be considered to have broken this sword. It could only be said that the golden staff arts were too overbearing. Small tricks. Although he said so, the white-boned sword emperor didn't slow down. His sword was a white-boned sword with a milky white body and a longer tip than normal swords. Shoo! 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 In an instant, it was as if countless white-boned sword emperors had appeared. Every white-boned sword emperor had a different posture, but what was similar was that as he swung his sword again and again, the fine sword net was annihilated in an extremely orderly manner. Indeed, as long as the opponent also has space and time profound, my death cut will have many flaws. This white bone sword emperor easily found the flaws of my death cut and broke them one by one from weak to strong. Yichen was not in a hurry and continued to use death slash. After a short while, the white bone sword monarch started to feel a bit impatient. His opponent was only using this move over and over again, as if he was just a sparring partner. He also discovered that there were fewer loopholes in death cleave, and it was no longer that easy to break through. Have a taste of my white bone light evasion slash. The white bone sword emperor drew a complete circle with its white bone sword. In the next moment, space-time distorted into a shocking arc. The sword net that Yi Chun had sent out was actually refracted towards Yi Chun himself. Space and time profound is vast and profound. I'm not as good as the white bone sword emperor. From this sword attack, Yi Chun could tell that the white bone sword emperor's space-time sword art was indeed one level higher than his, and the opponent had not even used his white bone time sword art yet. Clang! Clang! Using death slash to deal with death slash, Yi Chun dealt with it very easily. Two intersecting sword lights suddenly flashed and swept past Yi Chun's neck, tearing a hole in the green lotusaur domain. These two sword lights were a part of the death slash that Yi Chun had sent out before. However, the white bone sword emperor had used some unknown method to twist the space-time and change their trajectory and time sequence, which was why Yi Chun had almost been hit. The older, the wiser. In terms of space-time sword art, Yi Chun is not as good as the white bone sword emperor. I wonder how Yi Chun will deal with the white bone time sword art. While the crowd was discussing, the white bone sword emperor finally exploded. He turned into a beam of white light and shot towards Yi Chun. The space flickered incessantly, and each flash would make people want to vomit blood. Because it contained the charm of space-time disorder, it was impossible to lock onto his exact location. Lose. Beams of white light shot out. These were the sword lights from the white bone time sword art. Each sword light actually contained the power of space and time. Ordinary methods would not be able to block them. If one could block the power of space, they would not be able to block the power of time. The overlapping of space-time was enough to carry out a space-time dimensional attack. Powerful. This was the first time that Yi Chun had seen such a terrifying space-time sword art. Compared to it, Death Cleave was indeed much more immature. However, Yi Chun still had the 5-element sword art. In terms of defense, the 5-element sword art was rather terrifying. Almost instantly, Yi Chun was enveloped by the white light sphere that was glowing with a 5-colored halo. The white light sphere formed a world of its own and similarly contained space-time. It wouldn't be easy for the white bone time sword art to invade it. The sound of bubbles bursting rang out. Countless sword lights penetrated into the white light sphere. However, as the sword lights penetrated deeper, their speed became slower and slower. In the end, they became stagnant and could no longer move. The power is weakening. The white bone sword emperor squinted his eyes. How could he not see that Yi Chun's 5-element sword art was not only very impressive in terms of defense, but it could also weaken the power and transformations of his sword art? 5-element sword art. Rise and fall. Sometimes, rise and fall wasn't very useful against enemies that were too strong. This was because he had his own limits. However, if it was used against someone who was similar to him, it would be extremely terrifying. It could weaken the enemy's attack power and transformations. It could be said to be a divine technique. This Yi Chun hid quite a bit of his strength when fighting against me. The gold-robed emperor smiled bitterly. If Yi Chun had used the 8th level of sword domain earlier, he could only take a beating. The white bone sword emperor's expression was very gloomy. He had originally thought that he had a 70% chance of defeating Yi Chun. However, who knew that Yi Chun not only had the 8th level of sword domain, but also had such a powerful defensive sword art. Although his white bone time sword art was impossible to dodge, what could the white bone sword emperor do unless he could break through Yi Chun's defense? Forget it. I've obtained the sovereign's inheritance. In the future, I'll have the chance to perfect my sword art. I might even create a new sword art. There's no meaning in hiding it. It'll only make people look down on me. Having made up his mind, The white-boned sword emperor's aura suddenly soared. Sword burial art. This sword contained the profound of space-time. It was different from the white-bone time sword art. This sword buried time. Of course, it buried the opponent's time. There's actually such a sword art. Yi Chen's blood and qi were boiling. He discovered that no matter what he did, he couldn't use the five-element sword art. His time seemed to be locked by the opponent's sword art. The older generation really can't be underestimated. These old fellows always hide their strength. If it wasn't related to face, the white-boned sword emperor probably wouldn't use this sword art. The purple-robed emperor sighed. The white-robed emperor nodded. Indeed, he was a man of few words. The white-boned sword emperor could already see the result of the sword burial art. Unfortunately, white-boned sword emperor, you are indeed very powerful. However, this is still not enough. Suddenly, the space-time around Yi Chen fluctuated. The white-boned sword emperor's sword burial art was bounced off. It was as if there was an invisible Yi Chen using the five-element sword art. Chapter 1266. Heart Sword. The stronger the heart was, the more powerful the sword art would be. The sword burial art could seal Yi Chen's body, but it couldn't seal Yi Chen's heart. Impossible. Less than 10 people under the supremacy realm can block my sword burial art. His space-time profundity isn't as high as mine, so how could he block it? The white-boned sword emperor couldn't believe his eyes. The sword burial art was created based on the essence of supremacy flower burial and his own understanding of space-time profundity. It could seal the opponent's time in an instant. Of course, his time profundity was only at 20%, so it wasn't absolute. However, Yi Chen's time profundity didn't surpass his. How could he know that Yi Chen had already entered the Heart Sword realm? Under the Heart Sword realm, one might be sealed. But after reaching the Heart Sword realm, the power of the heart would be unimaginable. Whatever the heart thought, everything would become the truth. The white-boned sword emperor's sword burial spell could not lock onto Yi Chen's heart at all. So how could it seal his heart sword? What a terrifying sword burial art. If I hadn't comprehended the Heart Sword realm, I would have suffered a great loss. With the white-boned sword emperor as an example, Yi Chen warned himself that he could not underestimate some of the older generation warriors. These people might not be as famous as the young martial geniuses on the list, but they had lived for countless years and more or less had some trump cards. As long as they were given the right opportunity, they would be able to create an extremely powerful martial art after accumulating a lot of experience. Of course, the older generation couldn't be underestimated. Yi Chen wouldn't look down on those on the quasi-venerables ranking. The golden-robed emperor was ranked 24th. This trip to the sovereign Holy Land might have raised his ranking, but it was also possible that his ranking would fall instead. Who knew how much the others had improved? Especially those in the top 10, they had probably already reached the pinnacle of the quasi-venerables realm. My sword art might seem powerful, but it's still immature, especially when compared to the white-boned sword emperor. However, I still haven't used omniscient nature. This is the essence of the five-element sword art. Yi Chen wasn't too sure how strong omniscient nature was. He could only find out by testing it on his opponent. Sword burial art. The white-boned sword emperor did not believe it, and once again used the sword burial art to attack Yi Chen. In his eyes, Yi Chen had a treasure that did not fear time, which was why he did not fear his sword burial art. However, the potential of a treasure was limited, and it could not be used endlessly. There would always be a time when its power was used up. As long as his opponent did not have a treasure, there was nothing to worry about. Twice, 3 times, 5 times, 9 times. Yi Chen didn't counterattack. He was very interested in the sword burial technique. After blocking the sword burial technique time and time again, he was able to slowly understand the true face of the sword burial technique. As long as he could obtain a trace of its essence, even if it wasn't all of it, it would be extremely useful to Yi Chen. He could use this trace of essence to combine it with the martial arts essence of the Three Realms Paragon and his own understanding of the space-time ultimacy to create a sword technique similar to the sword burial technique. The 13th time. This time, the white-boned sword emperor went all out and used the sword burial art at full force. Even the onlookers could see that the space around Yi Chun had started to freeze, and Yi Chun himself seemed to be wrapped in a transparent crystal, completely sealed. In front of him, an incomparably sharp sword light pierced towards him. Clang! However, it was all in vain. Yi Chun did not even move, and the incomparably sharp sword light was directly deflected and turned into nothingness. White Robe Emperor, do you know what kind of technique this is? The Purple Robe Emperor frowned slightly and turned his head to ask the White Robe Emperor. The White Robe Emperor was silent for a moment, then slowly said, "If I guess correctly, it should be the Heart Sword realm. However, I have never heard of anyone below the Paragon level being able to reach the Heart Sword realm." Yes, the one who spoke was the Cyan Robe Emperor. The Yasha race's Yi Jianwang and the Evil Spirit race's Evil Sword Emperor have both reached the Heart Sword realm. The Cyan Robe Emperor continued. Oh, the Purple Robe Emperor's face flashed with surprise. He still trusted the Cyan Robe Emperor's words. The latter never lied, and he would not say something he was not sure of. As for the Yi Jianwang and the Evil Sword Emperor, the Purple Robe Emperor had seen their detailed information. As geniuses of different races, the possibility of them meeting each other was very small. Once they did, it might mean that one side would die. The Yi Jianwang and the Evil Sword Emperor were naturally not called Yi Jianwang and the Evil Sword Emperor. They were called Sword Emperors in their respective races, but the human race did not recognize them, so they added a word to each of them. Just like how other races would not recognize Yi Chen's title as Sword Emperor, they might add a word to him, making him the Human Sword Emperor. From the information, the Yi Jianwang and the Evil Sword Emperor were naturally very terrifying. One was ranked 13th on the quasi-venerable list, while the other was ranked 4th. Their reputations were definitely not undeserved. According to the information, the Yi Jianhuang's heavenless great sword art had already reached an extremely terrifying realm. It must be because of the Heart Sword realm that he had such power. As for the Evil Sword Emperor's Evil Sword of Misfortune, only its name was known. No one had ever seen this sword art before. White-robed Emperor, it's been 1,000 years since I've seen you fight. I wonder what level your strength has reached. The war between humans and demons is both terrifying and exciting. That is the most glorious and cruel time. The Purple Robe Emperor clenched his fists tightly. Now it was the time for everyone to accumulate power. Whoever improved would be the one laughing at the end, overlooking the starry sky. There were few more spectators. They were Dugu Ju, Chu Zhongtian, Dantai Mingwei, and the others. Yin Qingxian had also come. Without exception, their gazes were all focused on Yi Chun. Everyone's gaze was complicated. Yin Qingxuan's gaze was a little strange. She seemed to be looking at Yi Chun, but at the same time, she didn't seem to be looking at him. But in the end, she was still looking at him. He's always so dazzling. Isn't he afraid of being burned by his own radiance? Chu Zhongtian sighed. This didn't sound like something he would say. Some people are born to be worshipped. What we can do is perhaps follow behind him and witness his legend. Dantai Mingwei said softly. After the sword burial art failed 13 times in a row, the White-Bone Sword Emperor finally gave up. You should have comprehended the Heart Sword realm, but how much of its power can you unleash? The White-Bone Sword Emperor could already confirm that Yi Chun had reached the Heart Sword realm. Unfortunately, the Heart Sword realm was the hardest to control. To use it to greatly increase the power of one sword was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Yi Jianhuang was an exception. As for the Evil Sword Emperor's Evil Sword of Misfortune, no one knew what was going on. There's no need for the Heart Sword realm. I have a sword. Please give me some pointers. After obtaining the essence of the three-realm sovereign's martial arts, Yi Chun could naturally use the Heart Sword realm to increase the power of his sword. But the White-Bone Sword Emperor wasn't worth it. Boundless nature was enough. He relaxed his body and raised his right arm. The flying heaven sword was in a straight line with his eyebrows. There was no sound. Yi Chen's sword and hand disappeared, turning into illusory bubbles. In an instant, the entire world became quiet. Time and space seemed to be replaced by a world full of bubbles. In these bubbles, the White-Bone Sword Emperor saw his own thoughts, saw himself dodging and resisting. Chi 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 chi. The white-boned Sword Emperor's body spurted out blood. The blood was so beautiful, intertwining with the bubbles. When the transformation reached the limit, the opponent's inner changes would be absorbed. This sword required a certain amount of soul force. Of course, it also contained a trace of the Heart Sword realm. After all, Yi Chun had already reached this realm. Even if he didn't use it intentionally, it would still leave a trace. Chapter 1267. With one sword, the white-boned Sword Emperor was defeated miserably. The omniscient manifestation didn't contain space-time profound, but the five elements profound. Although the five elements profound wasn't as illusory and unavoidable as the space-time profound, it was the most complicated. The five elements reinforced and restrained each other, circulating endlessly. The five elements were the ultimate mutually reinforcing profundities. For example, space-time, yin and yang, light and darkness, as well as the four images, were all composed of 2 or 4 kinds of profounds. Only the five elements had 5 mutually restraining profundities, which made them the most complicated and unfathomable. The omniscient manifestation contained the 5 elements profound had reached the pinnacle in terms of transformations. Even the white-boned Sword Emperor, who was proficient in space-time profound, couldn't dodge it. Normally, he could distort space-time and easily escape from the attack's range. Unfortunately, his opponent was Yi Chun, a genius with peerless comprehension. It wasn't without reason that the sovereign of the 3 realms chose Yi Chun. If it was someone else, such as the Golden Robe Emperor or the Purple Robe Emperor, although they were talented enough and much stronger than Yi Chun, they couldn't completely inherit the essence of his martial arts. The inheritance of a legendary sovereign wasn't something that just anyone could inherit. What kind of sword art is this? I can't even see it clearly. If you can see it clearly, you'll have a chance to dodge. It's precisely because you can't see it clearly that you can't dodge it. So powerful. In just a few hundred years, he was able to grasp such a terrifying sword art. The Sword Emperor's position is definitely his. In the eyes of the crowd, Yi Chun's sword was extremely frightening. One had to know that, at their level, there were very few things that they couldn't see clearly under the sovereign level. And Yi Chun's sword art was precisely what they couldn't see clearly. I wonder if my Huang Jinyuan can block it. The Golden Robe Emperor smiled bitterly. In terms of offensive methods, Yi Chun had left him far behind. Huang Jinyuan was the strongest defensive martial art of the Golden Sovereign, and it could even protect one's soul. However, this sword was extremely extraordinary. With his Huang Jinyuan realm, the chances of him blocking it were not high. He reckoned that he would still be able to find a loophole. White-boned Sword Emperor, use your sword burial art in the upcoming war between humans and demons. Yi Chun didn't plan to do anything to the white-boned Sword Emperor. Defeating it was enough. The white-boned Sword Emperor glanced at Yi Chun, then fled with a dark expression. He found a secluded place and began to heal his wounds. Yi Chun's sword attack had injured him quite a bit. Even if the latter had stopped in time, the reason why he was in such a hurry to heal was because he couldn't afford to lose face. It would be a lie to say that he didn't hate Yi Chun, but he also knew that whoever's fist was bigger would be the truth. Sword burial art. What an amazing sword art. Yi Chun rejoiced in his heart. The white-boned Sword Emperor had given him a lot of inspiration, especially the sword burial art. After a round of fighting, Yi Chun had already grasped 50% of the essence of the sword burial art. With this, he could easily create another sword burial art. The martial arts in the world were as vast as the sea of stars. There was no martial art that was truly invincible unless it surpassed the others. Therefore, an additional unique sword art meant an additional method. For example, the omniscient nature might seem powerful, but if the opponent was equally powerful in transformation, the omniscient nature's use would be limited. At that time, the sword burial art would be more useful than the omniscient nature, and vice versa. The exit of the sovereign sacred ground is open. At this moment, a whirlpool in the air started to spin. This was the exit of the sovereign sacred ground. Let's go. This time, I must enter seclusion for a few thousand years to digest the inheritance. There were many inheritances in the sovereign sacred ground. When the time was right, even if one's strength was insufficient, they could still obtain the inheritance. In just a short while, there were only a few people left in the sovereign sacred ground. Yichen, I hope that we can meet again in the human-devil battlefield in the future. Dugu Ju left. Just like his character, he would never say a word more. Flowers bloom and wilt. Every time we meet, you always bring me a shock. I believe the next time will be no exception. Dantai Mingwe smiled faintly. She was like a bright moon, entering the whirlpool. Dantai Mingwe was an ethereal girl. As time passed, she became more and more similar to Yin Qingxian in certain aspects. They were both so ethereal. Perhaps they were the same person in their previous life, but in this life, they had become two different people, experiencing two different lives. This battle was very exciting. It also let me see a glorious tomorrow. Chu Zhongtian's eyes were full of longing and battle intent. He was different from others. Others pursued the peak of strength, but he also pursued strength and battle. Therefore, he would not be discouraged. Although the result was important, the process was the most exciting. One by one, they left. In the end, only the golden-robed emperor was left. Yichen, where are you going? Seclusion? The golden-robed emperor asked. Yichen nodded. It's time. The essence of the three realms supreme's martial arts was like boiling water, rolling around in his mind. If he didn't go into seclusion now, he would waste a lot of inspiration. Me too. The golden-robed emperor nodded and smiled. How about this 500 years? After 500 years, if you all come out, we will meet at the White Tiger Starfield's Horizon Star. The Horizon planet was a relatively famous level, 7 life planet in the White Tiger Starfield. Many people liked to gather on the Horizon planet because there were countless beautiful sceneries on the planet. Okay, see you in 500 years. 500 years should be enough. If even 500 years was not enough, then even 10,000 years would be too little. After all, there was a limit to the Quasi-Supreme. After leaving the Supreme Holy Land, the three returned to Planet Flame. Now, the entire Planet Flame belonged to Yichun. Although Flamestar was only a level 3 planet, it was not small. There were many places suitable for cultivation and seclusion. Of course, Su Jing would not go into seclusion on Planet Flame. Only in the Dragon Clan could she make full progress. After staying on Planet Flame for a while, Su Jing returned to Planet Azure Dragon. Your foundation is too weak. In the following time, besides digesting the inheritance, don't forget to build your foundation. Hand in hand, Yichun and Murong Qingcheng walked on a path covered with fireworks. This was Flamestar's most famous fire path. Now, it was monopolized by Yichun. Only those with his permission could enter. Yeah, I know, but you don't need to worry. Rose Supreme's inheritance is very special. It pays great attention to the foundation. Murong Qingqing nodded and walked hand in hand with Yichun on the fire path. She felt very peaceful. However, if she wanted to accompany Yichun to the peak, a peaceful life was impossible. For her, this moment was like an eternity. In the beginning, Yichun's seclusion frequency was very high. After coming out, he would immediately practice sword arts and then go back to seclusion. As the Three Realm Supreme's martial arts became more and more profound, Yichun's seclusion time grew longer and longer. The longest time he stayed was 30 years, and the longest time he came out was no more than a month. As for his parents and family, Yichun no longer had to worry about them. Not long ago, the upper echelons of the human race sent an envoy and gave Yichun a jade box. Inside the jade box were 2 life and death fruits. After taking the fruits, his parents smoothly broke through to life and death realm, increasing their lifespan to 100,000 years. As for his younger siblings, they had also broken through to life and death realm a long time ago. Without any worries, Yichun had nothing else to worry about, so he threw himself into training wholeheartedly. Chapter 1268. In the blink of an eye, 50 years had passed. Yichun's foundation had become more and more stable, and his cultivation base had reached late 8th layer. His body contained boundless sword yuan. At the 8th layer, every small realm required a large amount of accumulation. If one's foundation was weak, it would be difficult to continue breaking through. One had to settle down and train hard. 150 years ago, because Yi Chen had forcibly helped Murong Qingqing break through to the 8th layer, Murong Qingqing's foundation was not very stable. She was still at early 8th layer. However, according to Murong Qingqing, she would be able to break through soon. Presumably, Rose Supreme's inheritance had brought her a lot of benefits. Yi Chen's seclusion was not in a city, but in one of Flame Star's danger zones, Flame Ocean Forest. The Flame Sea Forest was a mystical place. The trees here were all spirit trees, and they were all fire tribute spirit trees. Every now and then, these trees would burn. Countless trees would burn. It would look like a burning sea of fire. This was how the Flame Sea Forest got its name. In the center of Flame Ocean Forest, the burning trees suddenly froze. Then, the flames instantly extinguished, and the trees immediately withered. Although my sword burial art is different from White Bone Sword Emperor's, its profoundness should be several times stronger than his. Just now, Yi Chen had only released the sword aura of sword burial art. He didn't actually practice sword arts. Otherwise, the entire Flame Ocean Forest might have disappeared. With Yi Chen's current strength, he could also cause great damage to life planets. But Supreme could destroy life planets. However, the true sword burial art requires the scene of falling petals to be considered to have reached the next level. The upper echelon of the human race didn't just send over 2 life and death fruits. They also sent over a peerless martial art manual. There were countless peerless martial arts recorded in it, and each peerless martial art had either a detailed or simple introduction. The sword burial art was one of the peerless sword arts, and its creator was Paragon Flower Burial. As for the 3 realms killing fist, it was naturally recorded in it as well. Flower burial, sword burial. Yi Chen carefully comprehended. In the blink of an eye, another 10 years passed. Yi Chen, do you dare to fight? On this day, a loud roar reverberated throughout the entirety of Planet Flame. A ripple appeared in space-time. Another person has come to challenge Master. In Sparkle City, a young man raised his head. He was one of the top 4 disciples of Yi Chen, Yan Jianwei. In the past hundreds of years, he had already reached the 7th sky of life and death realm. Among the human geniuses, he was not that outstanding, but he was not bad either. Ever since Master became the Sword Queen, a Sword Dao Emperor has come to challenge him every 10 years. I wonder what kind of big shot it will be this time. Dongfang Bai smiled. Among the 4 disciples of Yi Chen, Lung Xinghan had been wandering outside all year round and rarely came back. Huang Sume was married, so she rarely came back. The last time she came back, it was to visit Yi Chen with her husband. Only Dongfang Bai and Yin Jianwei spent most of their time on the Flame Star. Occasionally, they would go out. It's finally here. I hope the opponent this time is a bit stronger and can give me some inspiration. In Flame Forest, Yi Chen's figure flickered as he flew toward the source of the voice. In the void near the Flame Star, a tall and sturdy middle-aged man with a huge sword on his back stood there. As he opened his eyes, sword light shot out in all directions, making him look like a peerless, ominous sword. Fierce Sword Emperor, 50,000 years old. He was once a Sword Dao Emperor on the quasi-sovereign list. Swish! A blue figure suddenly appeared. It was indeed Yi Chen. You are Yi Chen? Fierce Sword Emperor sized up Yi Chen. Indeed you are. Yi Chen nodded inwardly. From the other's temperament, he should be an expert. Although he was not as good as White Bone Sword Emperor, he should not be too boring. Yining, but people usually call me Fierce Sword Emperor. Ferocious Sword Emperor's expression turned serious. He could sense an intense danger from Yi Chen's body. Make your move. Yi Chen stood with his hands behind his back. Then, you have to be careful. Fierce Sword Emperor pulled out the huge sword on his back, and the sword aura on his body continued to rise. Because the sword aura was too powerful, all the life and death kings within billions of li could feel it. What? It's still rising? The evil Sword Emperor's sword aura seemed to be endless. Even after 15 minutes, he was still climbing, which made all the life and death realm warriors watching the battle on the planet dumbfounded. They couldn't help but worry for Yi Chun. It seems to be a Sword Dao's secret art. Yi Chun remained unmoved, allowing Fierce Sword Emperor to increase his sword aura. According to speculation, the reason why Fierce Sword Emperor's sword aura could rise for such a long time was because he cultivated a Sword Dao secret art that could increase sword aura. After a quarter of an hour, Fierce Sword Emperor's sword aura reached its peak. At this moment, several hundred li around him seemed to have turned into a pitch-black tornado. It was a sword aura, an extremely ferocious and violent sword aura. Although you didn't interrupt my sword aura, I'm not going to be lenient. Fierce Sword Emperor didn't have much confidence before, but now he was much more confident. Whatever tricks you have, just use them all. Yi Chun said indifferently. I hope you can remain this calm from now on. Kill. With a roar, Fierce Sword Emperor charged toward Yi Chun along with his sword. When he was still several thousand li away from Yi Chun, Fierce Sword Emperor furiously slashed out. The ghostly wails and wolf-like howls rang out. Even though they were very far away, it still made the life and death kings on the flame star tremble with fear. Dongfang Bai and Yin Jianhui exchanged a glance, their eyes also filled with fear. What kind of sword art was this? How could it be so frightening? Oh, it contains life and death profound. Yi Chun could tell with a single glance that Fierce Sword Emperor's sword art contained life and death profound. Once the life and death profound was perfected, the martial skill created would also be a supreme martial skill, and an extremely frightening one at that. If the enemy's spirit was weak and their will was weak, they wouldn't even need to fight before the fighting spirit would be directly destroyed. Unfortunately, it's useless for me. I don't intend to study life and death profound at the moment. A person's energy was limited. Once Yi Chun completely digested the essence of the Three Realm Supreme's martial skills, he would perhaps study life and death profound martial skills, but not now. Your luck is not bad. Have a taste of sword burial art. In the past 60 years, Yi Chun had never used sword burial art. This was the first time. Raising his right hand's index and middle fingers, Yi Chun pointed at Fierce Sword Emperor. The wind stopped, and so did Fierce Sword Emperor's sword aura. 1, 2, several petals fell from the void, looking so beautiful and sorrowful. Fierce Sword Emperor's eyes were filled with disbelief, as if someone had grabbed his neck. Even after Yi Chun left, Fierce Sword Emperor still had lingering fear. This sword was countless times more frightening than his fierce sword. At that moment, he even had the thought of suicide. Frightening Sword Emperor. Deeply looking at the place where Yi Chun disappeared, Fierce Sword Emperor turned around and flew away. In this life, he didn't intend to challenge Yi Chun anymore. The title of Sword Emperor could be taken by anyone, and it had nothing to do with him. Chapter 1269. When using the burial sword art, the more petals there were, the more profound the burial sword art was. According to the records, when Supreme Burial Flower used the burial sword art, there were hundreds of petals. Yi Chun naturally couldn't compare to Supreme Burial Flower. When he used the burial sword art, there were only 4 or 5 petals. However, this was already very frightening. Back then, the White Bone Sword Emperor's burial sword art was far inferior to Yi Chun's and could only be considered superficial. Time flew by, and 40 years passed in the blink of an eye. 5-element sword arts are broad and profound. Before, my foundation was not enough, and the 5-element sword arts I created were very immature. Now that I have the essence of the Three Realm Supreme's martial skills, it's enough to greatly improve the 5-element sword arts. Be it in terms of profoundness or power, the burial sword art had already far surpassed the 5-element sword arts. Yi Chun naturally couldn't favor one over the other. He wanted to make the 5-element sword art into an even more powerful sword art, a super sword art that focused both offense and defense. First was a defensive sword art. Yi Chun was prepared to fuse the rise and fall sword art into this defensive sword art. After all, although rise and fall sword art was exquisite, it could only weaken the enemy's attack. In terms of defense, it was still quite lacking. If he could fuse it with a defensive sword art, weakening while defending, it would undoubtedly make the enemy despair. Of course, the prerequisite was to first create a defensive sword art and then fuse it. Qing Xian, come and attack me. In the starry sky far away from Planet Flame, Yi Chun and Yin Qingxian faced each other. Yin Qingshuan's visit was something Yi Chun didn't expect, even though she only came to see Yin Feng and the disciples of the mysterious sect. At this time, Yi Chun had just created a 5-elements defensive sword art. With Yin Qingshuan's strength, it couldn't be better for her to test out a defensive sword art. All right, Yin Qingxian nodded. For the first attack, Yin Qingxian used a palm art. The palm art was ethereal and swift, containing the profound of yin and yang. Puff. However, the moment this palm technique came into contact with Yi Chen's defensive sword technique, it immediately collapsed. For the second attack, Yin Qingxian didn't use a normal martial art. Instead, it was a sealing martial art. This sealing martial art was called Yin-Yang Destruction Mirror. Yi Chan felt the time and space around him change. In the next second, he appeared in a black and white world. The black and white air flowed continuously and eventually turned into a Tai Chi. From the outside, it looked like a yin-yang mirror had appeared in the starry sky. Bang! The yin-yang mirror shattered and disappeared. Amazing, first sealing the enemy, then annihilating the enemy along with the seal. How could Yi Chen not see through the profoundness of this move? If it were an ordinary person, they wouldn't be able to do anything. However, the 5-elements defensive sword art could defend against it. Yin Qingxian couldn't instantly seal Yi Chan, so she could only seal the time and space where Yi Chan was. Therefore, Yi Chen could still use sword arts. Seeing that even the yin-yang destruction mirror couldn't break Yi Chen's defensive sword art, Yin Qingxian knew that she had to use her true power. In these 100 years after leaving the supreme sacred land, she had already digested a portion of Old Man Heaven's will's martial essence. The remaining ones were more profound, and she couldn't digest them with her current realm. She could only leave them for later. This life and death heaven will palm of mine took me 100 years to create. Be careful. Besides the yin and yang profound, Yin Qingxian was also proficient in life and death profound. Life and death heaven will palm. Yi Chen looked pensive. Swoosh. It was only a single movement, but Yin Qingshuan's entire aura had changed completely. Her life force was vibrating intensely, dropping to the lowest point one moment, and then rising to the highest point the next. There was a kind of unpredictable aura of life and death. Besides that, Yi Chen also sensed a familiar power. That was heart power. He didn't expect Yin Qingxian to have comprehended heart power. Old Man Heaven's will capturing hand was similar to Paragon of Three Realms killing fist. They both contained heart power. The difference was that Paragon of Three Realms had completely integrated heart power into his fist art, increasing its power. As for Old Man Heaven's will, he used his heart to replace Heaven's heart, increasing his technique. Swoosh! Swoosh! Before Yin Qingxian waved her palm, there were already 2 palm winds flying towards Yi Chen. These palm winds were extremely powerful and contained the power of life and death. A barren planet nearby was merely brushed by the palm winds, and it immediately turned into dust as though it had been eroded by the wind. An even further broken planet suddenly erupted with boundless vitality, and when the vitality reached the limit, it exploded violently. Extreme life was death. Extreme death was nothingness. As for Yi Chen's 5-element sword art, there was an imperceptible pause. It seems like I have to go all out. Yi Chen had never underestimated Yin Qingxian. In Elysium, she didn't put all her focus on martial arts and was involved in many aspects. One should know that a person's energy was limited, and it was impossible to be number one in all aspects. However, there were benefits to being involved in too many aspects, and that was comprehending by analogy. Now it was time for Yin Qingxian to explode. Her improvement speed even shocked Yi Chen. Go! Accumulating her palm to the limit, Yin Qingxian slowly struck out with her right hand. The overlapping palm winds were either real or fake, and they covered the sky and covered Yi-chun. It was impossible for Yi-chun to dodge them. Of course, he didn't need to dodge them. This time, he was testing the defense of five-element sword art. Life and death were similar to the rise and fall of times. Five-element sword art started to become unstable. Occasionally, the palm winds would suddenly erupt, and it was impossible to grasp its pattern. Pop! In the end, Yi-chun's five-element sword art collapsed. Of course, Yin Qingshuan's life and death heavens will palm had reached its limit, and it could only push Yi-chun thousands of miles away. In terms of using heart power, Yin Qingxian was still not as good as Yi-chun. Otherwise, she wouldn't have pushed Yi-chun thousands of miles away. She would have been able to hurt Yi-chun more or less. Congratulations. In the future war between humans and demons, I hope we can fight together. Yi-chun smiled and flew over. Of course. Yin Qingxian nodded. After staying in Flame Star for a year, Yin Qingxian left. During this year, Yi-chun had completely perfected five-element sword art. What he needed to do next was to fuse the five-element sword art and rise and fall of five-element sword art together to create a more ultimate five-element sword art. Yi-chun had a premonition that this would be a huge project, and it would be many times more difficult than the sword burial art. But once it was created, Yi-chun's overall strength would skyrocket. 30 years passed. 80 years passed. In the blink of an eye, 200 years had passed since he left Supreme Sacred Land. Too difficult. I haven't even reached half of it. The difficulty of fusing the five-element sword art and rise and fall of five-element sword art was beyond Yi-chun's imagination. The five-element profoundness contained in the five-element sword art was very stable, but the five-element profoundness contained in the rise and fall of five-element sword art focused on changes in levels. The two couldn't be reconciled to a certain extent. If Yi-chun didn't have the martial arts essence of the Three Realms Paragon, he would have given up long ago. Chapter 1270. When he couldn't figure it out, Yi-chun would practice other sword arts. In these 80 years, the sword burial art had risen from 4 or 5 petals to over a dozen petals. And in terms of variations, Yi-chun could instantly slash out 999,990 swords, making boundless phenomenon even more unfathomable. As for Death Cleave, Yi-chun had gone through over 100 modifications and had erased over 3,000 flaws. As for how many flaws there were, Yi-chun didn't know. All he knew was that as his sword art boundary rose, he would see more and more flaws. This wasn't the beginning, nor was it the end. Few sword arts, sword burial art, boundless phenomenon, Death Cleave, and five-element slash. 5 different sword arts were perfected one after another. Faintly, Yi-chun could already see the road to becoming a supreme being. Demon Region, God-blessed planet. God-blessed planet was a life planet that the high-level demons bestowed upon the God-blessed queen. It wasn't originally called God-blessed planet, but that wasn't important. What was important was that it was now called God-blessed planet. The God-blessed queen was no longer the God-blessed queen, but the God-blessed empress. Ever since she left the land of divinity and demons, she had already defeated numerous quasi-exalts of the demons. Her reputation had skyrocketed, and she was one of the 5 young quasi-exalts of the demons. She was ranked 2nd on the quasi-exalt ranking. The celestial demon sovereign ranked 5th, the four-winged dragon sovereign ranked 12th, the wolf sovereign ranked 12th, and the heaven-swallowing demon sovereign ranked 18th. However, she wasn't satisfied with her current achievements. She was well aware that Yi-chun's progress wouldn't be any slower than hers. In the high-level hunting grounds, the impression that Yi-chun gave her was far too deep. If she didn't defeat him, she would never be able to erase it. Vast and boundless golden wings spread out. With a gentle flap, the God-blessed empress instantly vanished from God-blessed planet. Heaven-swallowing star. The high-level demons bestowed this life planet to the heaven-swallowing demon sovereign. On this day, endless darkness covered most of Heaven-swallowing star, causing the countless demons on Heaven-swallowing star to fall into an unprecedented panic. Some demon kings who hadn't seen the world even thought that the demon sovereign had arrived. God bless, Empress, what do you mean? A loud roar pierced through the 9 heavens. Next, a figure shot out from the largest city of the heaven-swallowing star. At first, it was just a black dot, but very quickly, the black dot turned into a giant that was 100,000 miles in size. His belly was especially big, and his eyes were like the sun and moon. His roar was like thunder, and there was an iron ring on each of his earlobes. Heaven-devouring demon monarch, it's nothing much. I just want to exchange a few moves with you. The clear and melodious voice was devoid of any emotion. Since you're overestimating yourself, I'll fulfill your wish. Follow me to the heaven-devouring ruins. The heaven-devouring ruins was a ruin tens of billions of miles away from the heaven-devouring planet, and it was also under the control of the heaven-devouring Devil Emperor. The commotion caused by the battle between the two was too great, and only the heaven-devouring ruins was suitable as a battlefield. With a teleportation, the two arrived at the heaven-devouring ruins. Withdrawing her wings, the God bless Empress stood on a piece of floating debris. The aura on her body was vast and sacred. She did not look like someone from the demons at all, but more like a messenger from God. Meanwhile, the heaven-devouring demon monarch did not shrink his body size, and he still maintained the size of 100,000 miles. His title was the heaven-devouring demon monarch. The bigger his body size, the more advantage he had. God bless, Empress. It has only been 200 years, and you can't help but challenge me. It seems like the consecutive victories have clouded your intelligence. Don't forget that I've even fought with the wolf monarch before. The wolf monarch that he spoke of was the wolf monarch ranked 12th on the quasi-venerable list. He was definitely a ruthless character. The stronger you are, the happier I'll be. Enough with the nonsense. Let's fight. The God bless Empress did not have the time to waste with the heaven-devouring demon monarch. What she wanted was a battle. She wanted the comprehension and experience that the battle would bring. Martial arts that had not been tempered could only be seen and not used. The golden wings spread out again. This time, the wings did not extend to the horizon and only expanded to about 100 meters. Together with her slender and graceful body, she looked like a goddess. She put her hands together, and circles of golden rings of light rushed out. These golden rings of light were like ripples, expanding continuously. When they got close to the heaven-devouring demon monarch, they had already enveloped the sky and the ground. Heaven-devouring roar. The heaven-devouring demon monarch took a deep breath. This breath was very intense, and even the golden rings of light wavered. Tornadoes were sucked into the heaven-devouring demon monarch's mouth. At the next moment, the heaven-devouring demon monarch's face flushed red, and he let out a deafening roar. The golden rings of light shattered inch by inch. Heaven-devouring demon monarch, have a taste of the light and darkness fist that I've prepared for you. The golden wings on her back flapped, and the God bless Empress's speed instantly reached the speed of light. She disdained teleportation. Although teleportation was faster than the speed of light, it couldn't increase her might. At their level, teleportation was useless at times. What was needed was a fair and square attack. Like an aurora cutting across the starry sky, the God bless Empress punched out. This punch wasn't dazzling, but it wasn't dim either. It was maintained at a perfect balance, as if the purest light and the purest darkness were fused together. Heaven-devouring earth. The heaven-devouring demon monarch felt an unprecedented threat. The light and darkness fist from the God bless Empress wasn't particularly flashy, but it was undoubtedly very close to the truth of the world. The 4 ultimacies of earth, water, fire, and wind were operating, and the heaven-devouring demon monarch performed his ultimate move, heaven-devouring earth. A small black hole appeared. No matter how small a black hole was, it was still a black hole. To a certain extent, this was the technique of an honorable. The heaven-devouring demon monarch attempted to devour the God bless Empress. As for her life and death, he wasn't concerned because he couldn't control this move himself. Without a sound, the God bless Empress disappeared into the black hole and into the heaven-devouring demon monarch's stomach. God bless Empress. You shouldn't have challenged me. What a pity. The heaven-devouring demon monarch shook his head secretly. There weren't many among the younger generation of the demons who dared to challenge him, because they knew how terrifying his heaven-devouring earth was. Heaven-devouring demon monarch, aren't you celebrating too early? At this moment, the back of the heaven-devouring demon monarch exploded all of a sudden. Blood rained down while the God bless Empress dashed out. You actually broke through my heaven-devouring earth. The heaven-devouring demon monarch turned his head slowly with a look of disbelief. After defeating the heaven-devouring demon monarch, the God bless Empress reputation among the demons grew. Some even secretly believed that the God bless Empress would become one of the strongest people in the history of the Dark Goddess bloodline. She would become the right-hand man of the great demon king bloodline. Yi-chun, don't make me feel bored. On the God bless planet, the God bless Empress looked in the direction of the 4 major life star zones. Time passed by slowly. In the blink of an eye, there were only 150 years left until the 500-year deadline. 5 elements sword art will decline after reaching its peak. Inside a barren life star, Yi-chun danced his sword art in a frenzy. As his sword art danced, the energy of the life star continued to collapse and weaken. With a boom, the huge life star exploded. Once the violent shock waves got close to Yi-chun, they would be weakened to 100th or 1,000th of their original strength. Chapter 1271. Not only did Zenith Decline contain a powerful defense, but it was also more than 10 times stronger than Zenith Decline in terms of weakening external attacks. However, there was always a loss. Apart from weakening external attacks, Zenith Decline could also strengthen the power of one's sword technique. Zenith Decline did not have this effect. It was extremely extreme. However, for Yi-chun, what he truly needed was Peak Decline. Peak Decline was a bit weak, but the weakening wasn't too severe, and the strengthening of his sword arts wasn't too powerful either. Average development meant mediocrity, so he might as well focus on one point. With Peak Decline, Yi-chun could be considered an ultimate sword artist among quasi-sovereigns. He could both attack and defend, and had no weaknesses. Combined with Heart Sword Realm, even a desolate life planet couldn't bear it. It should be known that the range of Peak Decline was not fixed, and completely depended on Yi-chun's will. When it was small, he only needed to protect himself. When it was large, it could cover a radius of 10 million li. Once one entered this range, it would already be good if the enemy could display even half of their strength. At the border of Black Tortoise Starfield and White Tiger Starfield, there was a huge floating meteorite. 2 figures were sitting on it, playing chess. True Marshal Supreme, I didn't expect you to dare come. Admirable. The person on the opposite side raised his head. It was the number 1 Supreme of the demons, Sky Demon Sovereign. At this moment, the 2 didn't emit any supreme aura, and looked like 2 ordinary kings. True Marshal Supreme placed a white chess piece and said indifferently, why not? Aren't you afraid that I'll set a trap to kill you? The Sky Demon Sovereign had 2 divine artifacts. One was the Sky Demon Sacred Armor, and the other was the Bloodlust Spear. The divine artifacts were refined from the fusion of Paragon weapons with divine stones. They were many times more powerful than Paragon weapons, and the true Martial Sovereign only had the true Martial Divine Jian. Celestial Demon Sovereign was confident that he could kill Supreme True Martial in a protracted battle. Of course, it had to be a protracted battle, so if he wanted to kill Supreme True Martial, he had to set up a formation to trap him. Hee. True Martial Supreme smiled. You can try. With that, his right hand stretched forward and the white chess piece fell. Sky Demon Sovereign sized up True Martial Supreme's wrist. His eyes suddenly squinted, and he laughed heartily. As expected of Supreme Martial Sage, he was able to find a sacred artifact in just a few hundred years. Impressive. Previously, Celestial Demon Sovereign didn't pay attention to it. But just now, when Supreme True Martial was playing chess, part of his wrist was exposed, revealing the golden scales. With Celestial Demon Sovereign's eyesight, He could tell at a glance that the scales contained the power of a saint artifact. The power of a saint artifact was very special, so it couldn't be forged. How could it be that easy to obtain a saint tool? This is just a defective one. Of course, I am still very confident in its might. How about we have a spar? Supreme True Martial's eyes were filled with fighting spirit. Celestial Archdevil stared fixedly at Supreme True Martial. Initially, he wanted to probe Supreme True Martial, but now that Supreme True Martial said he wanted to spar, he hesitated. The demons had always been paranoid, even after becoming a Supreme. Celestial Archdevil waved his hand. This time, I'm not looking for you for anything else. It's about the Azura world. Azura world? Supreme True Martial's brows creased. The Azura world was not a world of life. According to the records, it was an arena created by the Azura god. In the Azura world, every time one won a battle, they would be rewarded with a drop of Azura spring water. The Azura spring water contained a mysterious substance that could help a quasi-venerable step into the 9th layer of life and death realm, which was also the supremacy realm. The more Azura spring water one had, the higher the success rate. You want to open Azura world? Supreme True Martial looked at Celestial Demon Sovereign. Right, it's about time. Give me an explanation. In truth, Supreme True Martial didn't want to open the Azura world. No one knew when it started, but the Devil race and the human race each controlled a yin-yang Azura stone. Only when the yin-yang Azura stone was combined could the Azura world be opened. It had been 100,000 years since the last time the Azura world was opened, and the consequence was that more than half of the human race's geniuses died. Celestial Demon Sovereign smiled. Within 500 years, don't you think this explanation is enough? Supreme True Martial said. You think I'll believe you? You have no choice but to believe me. Supreme Golden Buddha hasn't recovered yet, right? So what? It was just a small war. We, the demons, have been able to suppress you humans for so many years. We didn't rely on a few advantages. You should know this yourself. Seeing that Supreme True Martial was silent, Celestial Demon Sovereign continued. Opening Azura world is beneficial to both of us. I'll give you some time to consider, but I hope it won't take too long. Celestial Demon Sovereign stood up, ready to leave. Supreme True Martial didn't stand up to send him off. All of a sudden, a long spear appeared in Celestial Demon Sovereign's hand, and he thrust it at Supreme True Martial. The spear was so fast that even time and space vanished in the face of this spear. Ding! Supreme True Martial was sent flying backward. Celestial Demon Sovereign, what are you trying to do? Supreme True Martial bellowed. Just kidding. Celestial Demon Sovereign smirked, but in his heart, he thought, it really is a sage-level inner armor. The power of the Bloodlust spear can't penetrate it. Forget it. Now is not the time to fight. Let's open Azura world first. As he spoke, Celestial Demon Sovereign's body flickered and disappeared without a trace. Supreme True Martial's face darkened as he touched the place where he was hit. He stood in the starry sky and pondered for a long time. After an unknown period of time, Supreme True Martial turned around and disappeared. He's not injured. Looks like it's a sage-level inner armor. In the starry sky, a faintly discernible voice came from a black chess piece floating in the sky. Then, the black chess piece exploded and turned into nothingness. True Martial Star, True Martial Grand Hall. Puffed. Supreme True Martial's figure appeared in the inner chamber of the True Martial Grand Hall. He spat out a mouthful of blood. Supreme True Martial's face was pale. Such a domineering bloodlust spear. The Royal Carpenter armor can only block 90% of its power. In fact, Supreme True Martial did not lie to Celestial Demon Sovereign. The sage-level inner armor he wore was indeed a defective one. The reason why he suggested a spar was because he wanted to make use of Celestial Demon Sovereign's suspicious nature to deter him from acting rashly. As for the last spear attack, Supreme True Martial had already anticipated it. Celestial Demon Sovereign was a suspicious person and would definitely probe the opponent. However, Supreme True Martial did not expect the spear to be so fast. It seemed like Celestial Demon Sovereign had unearthed more of the Bloodlust spear's potential. The demons are ambitious. It's not a good time to fight in the near future. I can only open Azura World. Supreme Zhenwu sighed. It was said that the human race had amazing geniuses, but who knew that the human race had always been walking on a tightrope? Once there was a shortage of talents, the human race would be completely suppressed by the demon race. Since ancient times, the human race might have had the upper hand, but they had never had the absolute upper hand. Azura World might be an opportunity. I hope I'm not digging my own grave. Chapter 1272. Yichen didn't manage to enter seclusion for 500 years. On the 360th year, Azura World opened. Let's experience the legendary Azura World. On this day, Yichen brought Murong Qingsheng to Spirit Realm. Spirit Realm was the life starfield where old ancestor Wuling resided. It was only 1/20th the size of White Tiger Starfield. Unfortunately, Azura World was right next to Spirit Realm. As far as the eye could see, a bronze gate over 100 billion li tall towered in the starry sky. Compared to it, life planets were minuscule, and ordinary planets were like specks of dust. The bronze gate was covered in rust. The gate had already opened, revealing a crimson whirlpool. So this is Azura Gate. So huge. I didn't expect to see Azura Gate enter Azura World. This life has not been in vain. It's said that one can obtain a drop of Azura Spring for every win in Azura World. I'm not here to look. With the Azura Spring, I'll have a chance to become a sovereign in the future. As soon as Azura World opened, an endless stream of 8th layer life and death heavenly kings rushed over. Demon race, human race, evil spirit race, Yiksha race, giant race, barbarian race, spirit race. The 8th layer life and death heavenly kings of every major race in the universe rushed over. Among them were newbies who had just entered the 8th layer, as well as quasi-sovereigns who had lingered at the peak for tens of thousands of years. The former came to broaden their horizons, but there was no lack of ambitious people who wanted to win a few battles and obtain a few drops of Azura Spring to build a foundation for the future. The latter, on the other hand, wanted to break through the limit of one's lifespan and become a sovereign. There were simply too many old monsters who had stopped at the peak of quasi-sovereign realm. Nobody wanted to die, and there were only two ways to stay alive. One was to obtain a treasure that could increase one's lifespan, and the other was to break through to the 9th layer and become a sovereign. Compared to the former, the latter was undoubtedly more attractive. After all, treasures that could increase one's lifespan were too hard to find. It could be said that all the old monsters couldn't help but rush over. Whether the youngsters on the quasi-sovereign list could withstand the impact of the old monsters was still unknown. Swish, swish, swish. One figure after another entered the bronze gate like moths flying into a flame. There's so many people. Looking at the sea of people outside the bronze gate, Murong Qingsheng frowned. The Azura Spring water is something that can only be found by luck. No one will give it up. As for the Azura Spring water, Yichen was also determined to obtain it. After 360 years of cultivation, his cultivation base had long reached the peak of life and death realm, and his foundation was extremely solid. Without any external help, he was confident that he could become a supreme expert within 1,000 years. If he could obtain enough Azura Spring water, the time would be greatly reduced. It should be known that the greatest use of Azura Spring water was to improve one's foundation. The Jade Spirit Emperor is here. What a powerful aura. A voice suddenly came from the crowd. Yichen looked over. Unbeknownst to him, a few young men had appeared hundreds of thousands of miles away. The young man in the lead had a tall and straight posture. The corners of his body were very hard, as if they had been carved by knives and axes. Jade Spirit Emperor, ranked 9th on the quasi-venerable list, a super genius of the spirit race. Let's go in first, Yichen said to Murong Qingsheng. Yes, Murong Qingsheng nodded. Shua. The two shot toward the crimson whirlpool in the bronze gate. Interesting. Sizing up Yichen's back, the corner of Jade Spirit Emperor's mouth curved into a smile. Jade Spirit Emperor, this time, it's time for you to prove yourself. The young man beside Jade Spirit Emperor said respectfully. Don't look down on others. The world is so big, and no one can guarantee that they will always be number one. Jade Spirit Emperor stood with his hands clasped behind his back and said indifferently. Another young man said, "Your Jade Soul True Body has already reached the 7th layer. Apart from a few people, I'm afraid the others won't even be able to harm a hair of yours." Jade Soul True Body was one of the 3 great body refining martial skills of the spirit race. It was a lot weaker than the 9th golden body, but it still couldn't be underestimated. When cultivated to the extreme, even a black hole would find it hard to destroy it. You'll know when the time comes. Jade Spirit Emperor didn't put the young man's words in his heart. How could a frog at the bottom of a well see the brilliance of the outside world? As time passed, more and more 8th layer life and death heavenly kings arrived. 3 groups of demons arrived. The first group was led by a young man with a wolf's head and a human's body. The second group was led by God Bless Queen, and the third group was led by a black-haired young man with a frightening aura. The young man from the evil spirit race, with the huge cross-shaped sword on his back, left a very deep impression. His gaze swept across the crowd, and no one dared to meet his eyes. It was as if his gaze could not only see through everyone's secrets, but even their fates. A black-cloaked, young sword emperor appeared from the Yikshar race. He was a young golden giant of the giant race, a 2-headed 4-armed giant. Apart from the frightening, young, quasi-sovereigns, some old monsters were even more astonishing. Nobody knew how so many old monsters existed. Some of them were even rumored to be dead. For example, the sobbing blood old man of the evil spirit race was said to have lived for a whole 120,000 years. The old guys are coming out one after another. That's good too. My sword burial art just happens to be lacking a sacrificial offering. The white-boned sword emperor looked at an old guy who had become famous before him and sneered. In the past 360 years, he had cultivated the sword burial art to a higher level. He could already create the scene of falling flower petals. Apart from this, his white-bone light slash and white-bone time sword arts had also reached a new level. He was confident that he could defeat Yi Chun with one sword strike. Passing through the Crimson Whirlpool, Yi Chun and Murong Qingcheng arrived at an incomparably vast arena. The boundaries of this arena couldn't be seen, and its boundless aura was enough to make any arrogant person calm down. Before the power of gods, mortals could only lower their heads. This was not shameful. The arena was like an enlarged version of the Roman Colosseum. The spectator stands were densely packed, and without exception, they were all at the 8th layer of life and death realm. Yi Chun. Su Jing's voice came. "Let's go." Yi Chun saw Su Jing. Beside Su Jing sat the Great Elder, Celestial Crystal Dragon Emperor, Golden River Dragon Emperor, and the others. Seeing Yi Chun, Celestial Crystal Dragon Emperor, and the others were deeply moved. The seemingly weak youngster in front of them had now become an existence they could only look up to. It had to be said that time could change everything. A huge hourglass hung above the arena. The sand continuously flowed down, and when the sand flowed out, the arena would begin. A smile appeared on Yi Chen's face. He saw Dugu Ju and the others. He wondered how much they had improved in the past few hundred years. At their level, the seemingly huge gap was actually not that big. Everything depended on one's potential. Chapter 1273. Yi Chen wasn't sure how many martial emperors there were from the various races, but he could guess it just by looking at the sea of people in the arena. The funnel-shaped arena was clearly divided into several factions. There were the demons, the evil spirit race, the Yikshar race, the Green Men race, and the other races from the Demons Alliance. There were also the human race, the giant race, the barbarian race, and the other races from the Human Races Alliance. Other than them, there were some neutral races that hadn't expressed their stance yet, such as the spirit race, the tail race, and the specter race. Yi Chun, you're already here. Suddenly, the golden-robed emperor's voice came from not far away. The current golden-robed emperor's aura was stronger than before, and his eyes were filled with confidence. It was obvious that he had improved a lot in the past 360 years. I've just arrived. There were many seats beside Yi Chun, and he extended a hand to invite the golden-robed emperor over. Sitting beside Yi Chun, the golden-robed emperor smiled. I originally planned to gather 500 years later, but I didn't expect it to be brought forward by 140 years. How lively! Almost all the martial emperors and quasi-martial sovereigns from the various races are here. It is indeed lively. Yichen nodded. More and more people gathered in the spectator stands, and, judging from the speed at which the hourglass was flowing, it would probably take 3 days for the sand to flow out. The next day, Yin Qingxian arrived. The third day, Agio and Lung Fifan arrived. Soon, it was the morning of the fourth day. In the sky above the arena, the last trace of sand had flowed out of the hourglass. As the sand flowed out, a spring appeared out of nowhere. The spring water was pink and translucent, as if it was carved from a pink diamond. Seeing this pink spring water, everyone's eyes turned red. Just like the records, the azure spring water was pink. A single drop of azure spring water could save them 100 years of hard work. So how many drops of spring water was there? Other than the azure spring water, a stone tablet appeared in the sky, and the rules were written on it. You can forfeit 3 times. Forfeit 3 times? Interesting. Yichen fell in a deep thought. The golden-robed emperor smiled. Looks like we'll have to stay in this arena for a year and a half. Dong! The war drums that had not sounded for countless years rang out, and the atmosphere in the wrestling arena instantly changed. The fiery atmosphere was filled with hot-bloodedness and bloodlust. At this moment, the majority of people only had victory in their eyes. It's about to start. Murong Qingcheng was also affected by the atmosphere. Her palms were sweaty, and a faint fragrance wafted from her sweat. Swish, 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 swish. A total of 18 red pillars of light shot towards the spectator stands. The emperor, who was enveloped by the red pillars of light, appeared in the arena at almost the same time. At this moment, the arena had been divided into 9 sections, and 9 battles could be held. Kill! The 9 matches began simultaneously. After half a cup of tea's time, out of the 18 people, only 6 were still alive. The other 12 had either been killed or had taken each other down with them. The bitter battle situation woke many people from their stupor. The azure spring water was good, but one had to be alive to enjoy it. The sound of the war drums was too strange. It could actually affect their minds. I forfeit. The second round of battles began, and 2 people forfeited. Sensing their voices, the red pillar of light teleported them back to the spectator stands. As for their opponents who won without a fight, they could directly obtain a drop of azure spring water. In the 5th round, Yichen's heart tightened. This time, there was Murong Qingcheng. Fortunately, her opponent was not too powerful, only at mid-8th layer life and death realm. Without any surprise or danger, Murong Qingcheng obtained victory. As for her opponent being a human, she also managed to preserve her life. Of course, one could forfeit 3 times, but as long as one didn't forfeit, the loser would be directly expelled from the Azure world. Is this the Azure spring water? Sizing up that pink diamond-like drop of Azure spring water in Murong Qingcheng's palm, Yichen released his soul power, wanting to analyze it. However, no matter how profound his soul power was, he couldn't analyze the mysteries of the Azure spring water because all of its essence had been sealed. Moreover, the Azure spring water had been contaminated with Murong Qingcheng's life aura, making it impossible to transfer. Only Murong Qingcheng could use it. Let's take it first. Yichen said, "All right." With a wave of her hand, Murong Qingcheng melted the Azure spring water and entered her body. A red light flickered, and without any reason, Murong Qingcheng's aura rose by a notch. Her foundation became more stable, and some useless demonic power impurities were directly evaporated. The impurities in her soul were also erased. Indeed worthy of being called Azure spring water. Seeing Murong Qingcheng's transformation, Yichen sighed inwardly. Although 1 drop of Azure spring water did not seem to have a heaven-defying effect, it still saved 100 years of bitter cultivation. Of course, this was the case for ordinary people. For Murong Qingcheng, with Rose Supreme's inheritance, 20 to 30 years of cultivation could have such an effect. For Yichen, it might only take 10 years. Unknowingly, 3 months passed. The spectator stands had become much sparser. Some were directly killed, some were half dead, and some were expelled from the Azura world. Some of the better ones had forfeited 3 times. In these 3 months, the number of people in the spectator stands had decreased to only 1% of the original number. Of course, the number was still not small. During this period, Yi Chun participated in 10 matches and won 10 of them, obtaining 10 drops of Azura spring water in total. 10 drops of Azura spring water had strengthened Yi Chen's foundation to an unimaginable level. His cultivation base had reached the peak of peak 8th layer life and death realm, and he could become a sovereign at any time. Of course, becoming a sovereign not only required a solid foundation, but also a kind of heavenly Tao comprehension. Otherwise, even if he could break through to the sovereign realm, he would be struck to death by the universe's heavenly tribulation. Wanting to become a sovereign was not that easy. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many old fogies stuck at this threshold. Murong Qingqing's improvement was even greater than Yi Chen's. She had obtained a total of 12 drops of Azura spring water, and her foundation had undergone an earth-shaking transformation. She no longer had any hidden dangers, and her current cultivation base had also reached late 8th layer life and death realm, only a step away from the peak. As long as her luck was not bad, reaching peak 8th layer life and death realm was just a matter of time. Buzz! A beam of red light shrouded Yi Chun, and in the next moment, Yi Chun appeared at the center of the arena. His opponent was a blood-haired old man, a quasi-sovereign of the Yiksha race. Junior, you're dead for sure now that you've fallen into this old man's hands. Seeing that Yi Chun did not give up, a sinister expression flickered on the blood-haired old man's face. He knew of Yi Chen's identity, and he was very happy to kill such a genius. Perhaps the higher-ups of the Yiksha race would even reward him with some life-extending treasures. This Yi Chun is out of luck. Bloodbone is not an ordinary quasi-sovereign. Bloodbone Old Man had been famous for a long time, and he was almost 90,000 years old this year. Ordinary quasi-sovereigns were not his opponent at all. If not for the fact that he had been in seclusion for the past few years, he would definitely have a place on the quasi-sovereign list. Of course, the other king-level experts still did not know that Yi Chun had the title of Sword Emperor. Otherwise, they would not have said such words. Die, Bloodbone Divine Palm. Bloodbone Old Man's palm struck at Yi Chun, layer upon layer of palm prints resembling a sea of blood. You're the one who's going to die. Yi Chun pulled out his sword and slightly shook it. Immediately, the space-time in front of him was sliced into millions of pieces, and Bloodbone Old Man's body seemed to have fallen apart, turning into countless blood-colored cubes.